Story 1. Dad gave my spoiled brother $120,000 for med school, but refused to help my business. Now they're begging for money, claiming my brother's life is in danger. Hi, so before I get into what happened, let me just tell you guys a bit about my family, so everything makes sense. I, 21M, come from a broken home. Unfortunately, my parents divorced when I was in middle school because my dad had an affair with his secretary. Of course, I found out about that much later when I was a little bit older. But the problems in my parents' marriage had always been there, and even as a child, I had picked up on the tension that always seemed to be there. They were together, but I could tell that they were not really in love, and there was definitely something off. When I saw other parents with their children, I could tell that they were a happy family, but that was not the case with my family. I also have an older brother, and one might think that coming from a broken family would have made our relationship stronger. But that's not what happened. No, unfortunately, my brother is a jerk, and for some reason he always seemed to have it in for me, right from when we were kids. He tried to put me down all the time and would bully me relentlessly. And that led to our parents taking sides as well. My mom was mostly on my side, while my dad always supported my brother, Eric. My brother, 25M, was not a good guy at all and was literally the worst person to grow up with. He was the meanest kid ever and would never let go of any opportunity to take on me with his friends. I was a lot smaller than him, even physically, so I could never do anything except run to my mother. And that made me look even worse because it earned me the label of a mama's boy. My mother would always reprimand him, but it didn't help because my dad would always take his side and tell my mother that I needed to learn how to play rough because that's how I would become a guy. But I didn't want to learn how to be a guy. I just wanted to live in peace. And for some reason, my dad and my brother just seemed to hate the idea of me having a peaceful life. They would constantly try to bother me one way or another. My mother would try to protect me, but there was only so much she could do because it wasn't like she could constantly keep an eye on us while also doing all the household chores. She was a stay-at-home mom, and she had a lot on her plate, what with raising us and also keeping the house in order. So it was nearly impossible for her to always prevent me from getting bullied by my brother or my dad. That's how things were, me growing up. And with time, I learned to accept it and just let it go instead of constantly complaining about it and fighting against it. Then, when I was in 8th grade, my mother sat me down and told me that she was separating from my dad. And at that point, I was old enough to understand that they had their reasons, and this was for the best. She didn't tell me the exact reason why they were getting divorced, but I just assumed that it must have been because my dad was a horrible guy to be married to, and she just had enough, which is why she was leaving. It wasn't until much later, when I was in high school, that I found out the real reason why she had left. Apparently, my mother had found text messages on my dad's phone between him and his secretary, and that was the last straw for her because she had been putting up with enough already, but she couldn't accept infidelity. We were having a heart-to-heart chat that day, and she told me that the reason that my dad had never liked me was because he hadn't even wanted a second child, but she had refused to give me up and had even threatened him with divorce. He was just setting up his business at the time, and they were short on money. They were already having a hard time paying all the bills, and having one child was also expensive for them at the time. Another child would be difficult to handle, but my mother put her foot down and said that she was not going to give me up and would definitely go through with the pregnancy. They did have a babysitter at the time because even though my mother was working before I was born, my mother suggested that she would continue to work and would just borrow money from her dad, my grandpa, until my dad's business took off, and then they would return everything. But my dad was not on board with the idea of taking money from his father-in-law, so he told my mother that the only way he would agree to a second child was if she quit her job and stayed at home. He expected my mother to disagree with it and terminate the pregnancy, but my mother didn't do so, and that's how things started falling apart between them. My mother acknowledged that both of them could have dealt with the problem better, but the way that my father had started resenting me and harming me after I was born made her feel terrible. And that's why she didn't ever try to reconcile with him. She told me that the fact that I had such a terrible childhood was partly her fault and apologized to me for it because she felt like she should have left sooner but didn't because she believed that it would have a negative impact on us. Unfortunately, the decision to stay in that marriage is what made things much worse, and ultimately she had to leave. But after getting hurt in the worst way possible, and part of her still loves my dad even after I was born and he had started to treat me really badly, she had held out hope that maybe he would change, but that never happened and she was just disappointed time again. So the distance between them just kept growing, and he ended up cheating. I love my mother. I really do. But I honestly think that she could have been honest with me about a lot of things way earlier than she chose to, because she only told me about all of these things when I was in my final year of high school. But they got divorced when I was in middle school, and unfortunately, I had to spend every weekend with my dad. My parents had worked out a custody arrangement where I would spend the weekends with my dad, and my brother would spend the weekends with my mom. It worked because I hated spending time with my dad, and I hated my brother even more. So I had made it very clear in the divorce that I did not want to be with my dad at the same time as my brother, because that would be a total nightmare. My mother agreed with it, so she got her lawyer to work out the terms. And even though my dad was not happy about it because he believed that it was important for me to bond with my brother, I thought that it was impossible for me to bond with a monster like him. So thankfully, my mother had taken my side and worked out an arrangement where I had to spend the bare minimum of my time with my dad and my brother, and I mostly just grew up with her. But despite that, we would spend the holidays together, and that would always be terrible. Because after his divorce, my brother started dating his secretary, and my mother weren't able to stand it. He had the good sense never to bring her around when we would meet for the holidays, but my mother knew the truth, and she hated it. So the holidays would always be tense, but we had to get through it somehow because my dad wanted it, and my mother had to agree because she had already put a lot of distance between my dad, my brother, and me, and this was the bare minimum that she could do so we could still at least pretend that we were family and were related by blood. And that is why we would try to get along. But that was just all on the surface. Deep down, none of us really liked each other, and both my brother and I had chosen which parent we liked more, and so had our parents, which is really not right. So I guess it's safe to say that my family was pretty dysfunctional, and I had a very weird childhood. Nevertheless, I continued to stay in touch with my dad even after I found out the truth in my senior year, because my mother had told me that apparently he was the one who was going to pay for me to go to college, so I had to be on good terms with him. And that's the reason why she had never said anything about these things beforehand, because she was afraid that I would get into a fight with him and then lose my college fund. My mother had only started working after I was born, so she had not saved nearly enough to be able to afford the kind of college that I wanted to go to, so my dad was my best bet. It was really hard for me, but I tried my best to stay on good terms with him. It all turned out to be pretty futile though, because apparently I never even had a college fund to begin with, and my dad continued to mistreat me and talk down to me. But a couple of months before I was supposed to graduate, a few of my friends and I decided to start our own business instead of going to college. It was a huge risk that we were taking because all of us were just 18 and had very little prior experience, but we were really passionate about what we wanted to do, and we didn't think that going to college would increase our chances of getting successful quicker. It was just a leap of faith that we would have to take. I was the one who had the idea of starting our own business, and even though we were just joking about it at first, we quickly made up our minds that this was what we wanted to do. It was going to be a clothing and accessories business because we kind of wanted to revolutionize the space, since most of the clothing and accessory stores in our neighborhood were mostly either mass-produced products from big corporations or small businesses that didn't really understand how teenagers wanted to dress and look. So my friends and I had been having a really difficult time finding stuff to wear that we could be our authentic selves in, and we got stuck wearing either really old stuff that we had to thrift or ended up looking like our dads. We had been joking about it, but it occurred to us that a lot of other people our age might have felt the same way, so that's how our brand was born, and I'm proud to say that we have expanded considerably since then, and I'm glad that I took that risk without bothering to go to college, because I think we did pretty well for ourselves. It was me and 3 of my friends who brainstormed for months and came up with a business plan. It was already decided that 2 of us would try to design the clothes, which would not be difficult since most of us were already pretty good at art and stuff like that and were interested in fashion, and the other 2 would focus more on the business aspect of things. So I was supposed to start looking for investors, which was going to be difficult because we were just a bunch of 18-year-old teenagers with barely any experience and no college degree. We didn't have a fashion degree, and neither did we have a business degree. All we had was grit. It sounds idealistic, but we were stubborn and had already made up our minds. For a few weeks, I didn't tell anybody about this. But then I couldn't keep it a secret from my mother any longer, so I told her everything. She was kind of nervous about it at first and insisted that I at least go to college and get a degree. But I told her that I was really sure about this and I just wanted her to support me, so she came around. But she told me that it would be very difficult to make my father agree to help me out with this because he already didn't like the idea of guys having typically feminine interests, and if he found out that I was dabbling in the fashion industry, he would probably never speak to me again. But I needed money, and my friends and I were being declined by every investor. Most of them didn't even entertain a meeting with us before saying no because nobody wanted to bet on us, and understandably so. The only people who would even touch our business would be friends and family, so that's who we had to rely on, and I understood that very quickly. So about 2 months ago, before I was supposed to graduate, I decided to talk to my father about money for my business. My friends had already spoken to their parents, and everybody had agreed, albeit after a lot of pleading and begging, to invest in our business and help us out. But my dad would be the toughest nut to crack, and I already knew it, of course. First, I had to tell him that I hadn't applied to any colleges at all because my friends and I had started working on our own brand, and that's what we wanted to go ahead with, and that's what I needed my college fund money for. When I first told him about it, that I was not going to college, he didn't seem to care and said that he was fine with whatever I did. But when I told him that I would need the money from my fund to fund my startup, he told me that he didn't have any money set aside for me because he was serious, not even kidding, about not caring about what I did. That was when I found out that I never even had a college fund to begin with because everything that he had already spent on my brother, who went to medical school. My brother started 4 years before me, and I knew that he went to medical school. I also knew that it would be expensive, but I figured that my dad's business was doing well, so he would, of course, be able to pay for both my brother and I to go to college. What I didn't realize was that my brother was not just taking money from my dad for school. He was also taking loads of money from him otherwise to have a fun lifestyle when he was supposed to be studying to become a doctor, and my dad was happy to help him. He told me that he had written a check to my brother around the time that he left for medical school and given him his entire life savings that he had been setting aside. It was a huge amount, almost $120,000, and he had just given it all away. Since then, he had been living off of his salary, and he didn't mind it one bit. He had also assumed that I would not be going to college, something that he was right about, but for all the wrong reasons, which is why he had never bothered to save for me or even tell me that I didn't have a college fund. He explained to me that day that he just believed that Eric was his brighter son, and he had never expected that somebody as stupid as me would even bother to want to go to college, let alone get in anywhere. And I had proved him right by not applying and deciding that I was going to start a business because apparently this is exactly what he had expected of me. I thought that he was kidding or something, but after a few minutes, I realized that he was being serious, and he had actually given his entire life savings to Eric to spend, and he had nothing for me. I completely flipped out at him because not only was I upset that he didn't even think to set aside any money for me, he had called me stupid and had called Eric bright. That day, I finally let loose and told him exactly what I thought of him because I just couldn't take it anymore. I had expected him to help me out just a little, and I was going to pay him back once my business started making money, but he couldn't even do this much for me because he was just that selfish and hated me enough. I was inconsolable because even though I had always known that my dad didn't like me and he liked Eric way more, I hadn't seen this coming. We got into a massive fight, and that was pretty much the last day that I spoke to my father because after that I had nothing left to say to him. During the fight, we had pretty much said everything that we had to say, and there was nothing more to add to it. I decided that I was not going to see my dad ever again, and he was fine with it because he realized that no matter how much he wanted to, I was not going to turn out like Eric. After that, I pretty much just moved in with my mom, and it was hard to let my friends down and tell them that my dad would not be giving us money to start the business, but they understood. My mother was the one who helped me out. She gave me some money herself and borrowed the rest from my grandparents, something which I had been trying to avoid because they're old, and I wanted them to save money for emergency medical expenses or whatever. They were glad to come on board as investors and mentors, and I'm happy that they decided to bet on me. I'm also pretty sure that they are glad that they decided to do that because our brand is doing great, and we are as profitable as it can get. We are pretty popular among teens, and it's really difficult to believe how hard we had to work to get here and how far we have come. But it's true. So I would say that my brand is a lot more successful than my dad's business, and I'm sure that was a bitter pill for him to swallow. But fast forward to 2 weeks ago, something weird happened, and my dad called me up after almost 3 years of not talking to each other. And surprisingly, this call was about Eric because he had bad news for me. He started off by congratulating me on the success of my business. I thought that he would finally acknowledge how wrong he was, but he told me that they actually needed my help. He said that Eric had completed his residency recently, but he was in huge trouble because he had started gambling when he was living away from home, and my dad recently found out that he was in debt. It was not even a small amount, a significant amount of money, and he had people looking for him because he needed to cough up the money. Eric had to come back home within days of finishing his residency and hiding out with my dad right now. But that's not going to help alone because sooner or later he will be found out, and these people that he's dealing with apparently are kind of dangerous, and my dad is scared that something bad might happen to him. This is where I come in. He said that he needs me to lend them some money to pay off their debt so they can start fresh. My dad is living off of his salary right now. He expects me to help them out with the money since my business is doing so well. He thinks that it might not be such a big problem for me as it might be for him. This is all he said. There was no apology for the past, and he pretended like we had always had such a cordial relationship. There was not even a hint of remorse in his tone, and it really pissed me off that he just expected me to help them out because he had called me. So I got really mad, and I told him that he could knock on other doors and beg them for help, but he was a fool to expect anything out of me. Then I hung up and blocked his phone number. After that, I got a few calls from an unknown number, and I figured that it must have been my brother, so I blocked him as well so they would not have any way to access me. It's been 2 weeks now, but I haven't been able to shake off the guilt, and I just feel really bad right now. As a matter of fact, I've been feeling really weird about my decision to not help them despite having the means to do so ever since I blocked them. I feel like I still have the opportunity to do right by them, but I don't know if they deserve it, and I'm really confused about what to do right now. Am I the a-hole for not wanting to help my brother after my dad refused to invest in my business 3 years ago because he had already spent his life savings on my brother? Update 1. Hey guys, thank you so much for the response. I have decided that I'm going to sleep on this for a couple more days and think about what to do instead of letting my emotions get the better of me. So far, I hadn't spoken to my mother about it because I didn't want to stress her out. She had cut my dad and Eric off around the same time that I stopped speaking to them, but I know that she worries about my brother as well. She can't help it. She's a mom, and I know that if I told her that my brother was in debt, she would get really anxious about it. But I just had to talk to her about this, so I told her everything. And surprisingly, she said that I had no reason to help them because they had never looked out for me or had my back. It would have been a different story if my father and my brother had apologized to me for how they had been mistreating me my entire life. But they didn't even do that, and it was the bare minimum. So I really had no reason to feel sorry for them because Eric had dug this grave for himself, and now he could lie in it. My mother told me that she would have been worried about him had he been any younger, but he's in his early 20s, and it's not like he didn't know what he was doing. He screwed up. My dad allowed it to happen by encouraging him to be the worst in his entire life. Now the two of them could clean up this mess. I thought it was great advice, even though I'm not sure what I want to do right now. I'm still going to think about it, but honestly, my mother has a point. This is my hard-earned money, and I don't want to just give it away to a gambling addict. Besides, I don't even know if they were telling me the truth or it was just a story that they made up as a ploy to get cash out of me. Honestly, I wouldn't put it past them because, all things said and done, I'm a lot more successful than they had bargained for, and I'm sure that it's not easy for them to accept this. So, of course, they will try to do anything in their power to screw it up for me. Update 2. Hey, so I made the post last week. Yesterday, I decided to do some digging to find out what was going on, so I could make an informed decision and not deal with the constant guilt of hanging my family out to dry. I know that they did me bad and stuff, but I am a paranoid guy, and I just wanted to make sure that nothing that bad was going to happen to them because I don't think I would be able to forgive myself if it did, and I would hold myself responsible if something did happen. So I thought that I would pay them a visit and check out what's up. I went over to my father's house, but to my surprise, I found out that they had sold that house around 3 weeks ago, and a new family was already living in it. I spoke to the neighbors and found out that the house had been on sale for almost a month. Apparently, the realtor had made a huge sale, and my dad had received a substantial amount of money because the house that they had been living in was apparently in a prime location right now and was worth quite a lot. But this was 3 weeks ago, and my dad had already received the money by the time he called me, so I could not understand why he felt the need to ask me for money as well. It was confusing, and I had no idea what to make of it until this morning when I received a call from my dad's lawyer who told me that I was going to be excluded from my father's, well, because I had apparently failed the test that he had set for me. You guys are reading it right. They were not in any real trouble, but my dad was just testing me to see if I would have their back. and on the basis of that, he would include me in the inheritance. He had sold the house because he was moving to live with Eric, who had recently finished his residency, and since he wanted to wrap everything up here before he left, he created this little test for me. I can't even imagine what kind of screwed-up mind would think that this is an acceptable thing to do, and I'm honestly glad that I failed his little test because I really don't need his money. He can disappear off the face of the earth tomorrow, and I still wouldn't care because I had been caring a lot in the past few weeks, and it got me nowhere. So no more of that. Gosh, it's still mind-boggling how insensitive and psychotic the two of them still are. I think some people are just not capable of changing and think that the world revolves around them. I'm just glad that the business is doing well, and I will probably not need to rely on anybody's inheritance for the rest of my life if my business continues to grow at this rate. But the mystery had been solved, and there was no reason for me to worry. It's just sad because now, if something actually ever happens, I probably won't even believe them. They are pathetic. I just absolutely have to say that. Update 3. Hello. So this update is coming almost a year after the last one, and I'm happy to tell you guys that I am engaged now. I met my future wife last year, and I know that getting engaged after being together for just a year is too soon for most people, but you know what they say, when you know, you just know. And besides, I have known my fiancée ever since we were kids. She had moved away in the middle for a bit, but now she's back, and that's how we reconnected last year and started dating almost immediately because we had wasted a lot of time, and we didn't want that anymore. But the update is not about her as much as I would want to continue talking about it. It's about my dad and my brother's reaction to the news of the engagement. For some reason, they felt the need to reach out to me via email and informed me that while they were happy for me and my fiancé, they would not be attending the wedding because they think that it's inappropriate for them to be present at an event where the host doesn't even like or respect them. So they wish me the best. They will not be attending any of the wedding festivities. My mom, my fiancé, my friends, and pretty much everyone I know read that email because I forwarded it to them, and we had a good laugh about it. It was bold of them to even assume that they would be invited, but nevertheless, it's good to see that they haven't changed a bit and still think that the world revolves around them. At least it keeps us entertained. That's for sure. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Before we start, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Now let's continue. My mom wanted to give away my share of inheritance, which I got from grandfather, to her golden child because she needed it more. I chose not to do so and moved out. I'm a 28-year-old guy living with my mom, 52F, and younger sister, 24F. Our dad passed away when I was 18 and my sister was 14. Since then, it's been just the three of us in the house. Growing up, I always felt like my mom favored my sister. It started small. My sister would get new clothes while I got hand-me-downs from cousins. As we got older, the differences became more noticeable. When I made the honor roll in 8th grade, my mom said, "Good job," and went back to watching TV. When my sister made the honor roll 2 years later, Mom threw a party and invited the whole family. I remember one summer when I was 15, I wanted to go to a science camp. Cost $500, which was a lot for our family. I worked odd jobs all spring to save up, but I was still short. When I asked Mom if she could help with the rest, she said we couldn't afford it. 2 weeks later, she bought my sister a $600 phone because all her friends had one. Don't get me wrong, my mom wasn't cruel or abusive. She just didn't seem to see me sometimes. My sister was loud and demanding, always needing attention. I was quieter, more independent. I think Mom found it easier to focus on my sister's needs and assume I was fine. When it came to chores, the inequality was clear. By the time I was 16, my weekly chore list included mowing the lawn, taking out the trash, doing dishes, vacuuming the house, and cleaning the bathroom. My sister's only chore was to keep her room tidy, which she rarely did, and Mom never enforced it. I tried not to let it bother me too much. I told myself that maybe my sister needed more support or that Mom was just closer to her daughter. But it hurt, especially after Dad died. I felt like I'd lost both parents, in a way. My relationship with my dad had been complicated. He worked long hours and traveled a lot for business, so he wasn't around much when we were young. When he was home, he tried to connect with me through sports, but I was more into computers and science. I think he was disappointed that I wasn't the athletic son he'd hoped for. As I got older, Dad and I found some common ground through our shared love of classic rock. We'd listen to his old vinyl records together, and he'd tell me stories about concerts he'd been to in his youth. Those moments were rare, but precious. When Dad got sick, it happened fast, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was gone within months of the diagnosis. I was just starting my senior year of high school. Mom fell apart, and suddenly I had to be the man of the house. I got a part-time job to help with bills, started driving my sister to her activities, and tried to keep the household running. My grades slipped that year. I had been hoping for scholarships, but with everything going on, I barely managed to graduate. My dream of going away to college died quietly. Instead, I enrolled in community college and kept working. My sister, on the other hand, seemed to flourish after Dad's death. Mom poured all her energy into making sure my sister had everything she needed and more. When it came time for college, Mom took out loans to send my sister to an expensive out-of-state university. Meanwhile, I was still living at home, working full-time at a grocery store and taking night classes. I don't want to sound bitter. I love my sister, and I'm glad she got opportunities, but it was hard not to feel resentful sometimes. My grandfather, on my dad's side, passed away last year. We weren't close after Dad died. That side of the family kind of drifted away. I saw him maybe once a year at most. That's why I was shocked when we found out he'd left a sizable inheritance to be split equally between me and my sister. It wasn't millions or anything, but enough to make a real difference, about $100,000 each. For the first time in my life, I saw a chance to get ahead, to pursue my dreams instead of just scraping by. I had been working as an assistant manager at the grocery store but always dreamed of opening my own cafe. I love coffee, and over the years, I taught myself a lot about different roasts and brewing methods. I even took a barista class at a local coffee shop. The inheritance could finally make that dream possible. My sister, on the other hand, immediately started spending. She'd graduated college the year before and was working as a social media manager for a small local business. The job didn't pay great, but Mom was still supporting her, so all her money was fun money. Within weeks of getting the inheritance, my sister bought a brand new car. Not just a reliable used car, but a flashy sports car that cost nearly $50,000. Then came the designer clothes, the latest iPhone, and a lavish vacation to Europe with her friends. Within 6 months, she had less than $20,000 left. That's when the drama started. My mom pulled me aside one day and started talking about how my sister was struggling financially. She went on about how my sister needed to pay off her student loans and couldn't afford rent in the city where she wanted to move for a new job opportunity. Then she dropped the bomb. She wanted me to give my sister the bulk of my inheritance. I was stunned. I told her absolutely not. This was my chance to finally get ahead in life and pursue my dreams. My mom got angry, saying I was being selfish and that family should help family. She guilt-tripped me, bringing up all the times my sister had been there for me, which, honestly, I couldn't recall many instances of. The argument escalated. My mom said if I couldn't do this one thing for my sister, then maybe I should move out and stop mooching off her. I reminded her that I paid rent and contributed to household expenses, unlike my sister who lived there for free when she wasn't at college. My mom brushed that off, saying my sister needed more support right now. Words spread to the rest of the family. My aunts and uncles from my mom's side started calling and texting, telling me I was being cruel to my poor little sister. My cousins posted vague statements on social media about greedy people that were clearly aimed at me. It felt like everyone was ganging up on me. The only person who took my side was my grandmother, my mom's mom. She called me privately and said she understood why I wanted to keep my inheritance. She revealed that my grandfather had actually considered leaving everything to my sister, but she had convinced him to split it equally. She thought it was important for me to have a fair shot at building my own life. Now the house is tense. My mom barely speaks to me except to make snide comments. My sister alternates between crying about how unfair life is and making passive-aggressive remarks about selfish people. I'm seriously considering moving out, but rent in our area is insane, and it would eat up a big portion of my inheritance. I feel like I'm going crazy, Am I really the bad guy for wanting to keep the money my grandfather left me? Should I just give in to keep the peace? I'm torn between standing my ground and feeling guilty for causing all this family drama. Edit. Thank you all for the responses. To answer some common questions. My sister's degree is in communications. She currently works as a social media manager for a small local business but wants to move to a bigger city for better opportunities. I've been living at home to save money while working and taking night classes in business management. The plan was always to move out once I finished my degree. My mom has always been a bit of a pushover with my sister, even when we were kids. My sister would throw tantrums until she got her way. I think my mom just found it easier to give in than to deal with the drama. As for why I've stayed living at home this long, it's a combination of the high cost of living in our area, wanting to help my mom after Dad passed, and trying to save up to start my business. I do pay rent and contribute to bills. Update 1. It's been a few weeks since my original post, and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their advice and support. It really helped me feel less crazy and more confident in my decision. Taking the advice of many commenters, I decided to move out. Finding an affordable place wasn't easy. Our area has become increasingly expensive over the years, with lots of tech companies moving in and driving up prices. I spent days scouring online listings and driving around looking for rent signs. I finally found a small studio apartment in an older building. It's not great. The appliances are ancient, the carpet has seen better days, and I'm pretty sure I can hear my neighbor's every move through the thin walls. But it's all mine, and that feels pretty amazing. Moving out was interesting, to say the least. When I told my mom I was leaving, her reaction was a mix of anger and disbelief. She couldn't seem to decide if she was upset I was going or glad to be rid of me. She kept saying things like, "I can't believe you're abandoning the family like this," followed immediately by, "Well, I hope you're happy on your own." My sister's reaction was even more extreme. She spent most of the time I was packing sulking in her room. When she did emerge, it was to ask if she could have my TV since I clearly don't care about the family anyway. I told her no, and she stormed off, slamming her door so hard a picture fell off the wall. The day I moved, my mom made one last attempt to get me to change my mind about the inheritance. She brought up every possible guilt trip. How she sacrificed everything for us after Dad died. How family should stick together. How my sister has always looked up to me. News to me. When none of that worked, she switched to threats, saying I'd regret this decision and that I shouldn't come crawling back when I fail. It was my grandmother who came to help me move. She showed up early in the morning with coffee and donuts, ready to work. She didn't say much while my mom was ranting, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. Disappointment in my mom, not me. Once we were alone, loading up her old station wagon with my belongings, my grandmother opened up. She told me how proud she was of me for standing up for myself. Then she shared some family history I never knew. Apparently, my mom had pulled similar stunts with her siblings over the years, always favoring whoever was the neediest at the time. There was the time she convinced my grandfather to co-sign a loan for my aunt, who then defaulted, nearly bankrupting my grandparents. Or the time she gave my uncle money that was supposed to be for my grandmother's medical bills because he was going through a rough patch. It was eye-opening and made me feel less guilty about my decision. I asked my grandmother why she never said anything before. She sighed and said she tried many times, but my mom always dismissed her concerns. Sometimes, she said, people have to learn their own lessons. The first week in my new place was tough. The silence was deafening after years of living in a house with other people. I was lonely and second-guessing myself. Had I made a huge mistake? Should I have just given in to keep the peace? Then my sister called. For a moment, I felt hopeful. Maybe she was reaching out to reconcile. But no. She wanted to know if I'd co-sign on a lease for her in the city since her credit wasn't great. When I said no, she exploded, calling me every name in the book and saying I was dead to her. I hung up and blocked her number. That call, as hurtful as it was, helped solidify my resolve. I realized I'd made the right choice. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself first, and while it was scary, it was also liberating. On the bright side, I've been making progress with my business plan. I've been researching local coffee shops, studying their menus and prices, trying to figure out what niche I could fill. I found a small space that would be perfect for my cafe, and I'm in talks with the owner about leasing it. It needs a lot of work, but I'm excited about the potential. I've also connected with a few local artists about displaying their work in the cafe. There's a community college nearby with a good art program, and I thought it could be cool to have a rotating display of student work. It would give the students exposure and provide ever-changing decor for the cafe. My mom's side of the family is still giving me the cold shoulder. I get the occasional text from a cousin asking if I've come to my senses yet, but mostly it's radio silence. It hurts, but I'm trying to focus on the future rather than dwell on their disapproval. Surprisingly, my dad's family has started reaching out more. My aunt, Dad's sister, invited me over for dinner last week. We had a great talk. She said she always felt bad for how my mom treated me and wished she'd done more when I was younger. It's nice to feel like I have some family in my corner. I'm still figuring things out, but I feel more at peace with my decision. Yes, it's been hard and lonely at times, but it also feels like I'm finally living my own life instead of being a supporting character in my sister's story. I'm nervous about the future, but for the first time in a long time, I'm also excited. Update 2. It's been about 3 months since my last update, and life has taken some unexpected turns. First, the good news. My cafe is officially open. It's been a wild ride getting everything set up, but seeing my dream become reality is amazing. The space needed more work than I initially thought. There were plumbing issues, electrical problems, and don't even get me started on the health department requirements. But step by step, it all came together. I went with a cozy, slightly quirky vibe for the decor. Mismatched vintage furniture, local art on the walls, and plants everywhere. The menu is small but focused, really good coffee. I splurged on a top-of-the-line espresso machine, fresh pastries from a local bakery, and a few simple breakfast and lunch items. The first few weeks were slow, but word is starting to spread, and we're building a loyal customer base. There's a group of writers who come in every morning and stay for hours. A book club has started meeting here once a month. It's becoming exactly the kind of community spot I'd hoped for. I'm working insane hours and I'm exhausted, but it's a good kind of tired. Every night when I lock up, I look around and feel a sense of pride. This is mine. I built this. Now for the family drama. About a month ago, my sister showed up at my apartment unannounced. It was late, nearly midnight, and I was just getting home from the cafe. She was a mess, crying, mascara running down her face, clothes rumpled like she'd been sleeping in them. Turns out she'd lost her job. The company she worked for had gone through a round of layoffs, and as one of the newest employees, she was one of the first to go. She couldn't afford her rent in the city anymore. She begged me to let her move in with me, just until she got back on her feet. I said no. It was hard seeing her cry. It brought back memories of when we were kids, of me always trying to protect her and make her smile. But I knew if I let her in, I'd never get her out. My tiny studio was barely big enough for me, let alone 2 people, and I knew from experience that my sister's temporary situations had a way of becoming permanent. She didn't take it well. She screamed at me, saying I was heartless and that she'd always known I hated her. Then she threatened to tell everyone that I'd abused her as a kid if I didn't help her. I was shocked. Nothing like that had ever happened. We'd had normal sibling squabbles, sure, but abuse, never. I told her to leave, or I'd call the police. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard I thought it would break. I spent the rest of the night unable to sleep, replaying the conversation in my head and wondering if I'd done the right thing. The next day, my phone blew up with messages from family members. Apparently, my sister had gone to my mom and spun some story about how I'd physically threatened her when she asked for help. My mom, of course, believed her without question. I tried to explain what really happened, but no one wanted to hear it. I was reeling from all this when my grandmother called. She'd heard both sides of the story and said she believed me. She also dropped a bombshell. She was changing her will. Originally, she'd planned to leave everything to my mom, assuming it would be divided fairly between me and my sister. Now she's leaving a significant portion directly to me. She said she couldn't trust my mom to be fair. When my mom found out about the will change, she lost it. She left me a voicemail full of curses and threats, saying I'd manipulated my grandmother and turned her against the family. She said, as far as she was concerned, she only had one child now. It hurts, I won't lie. Despite everything, they're still my family. There's a part of me that wishes we could go back to when we were kids, before all this drama and resentment built up. But I also know that's not possible. We can't go back, we can only go forward. The cafe is keeping me busy, which helps. I'm making new friends with other small business owners in the area. There's a real sense of community among us. We share advice, vent about difficult customers, and even help each other out when someone's short-staffed. One of them, a guy named Mike who owns a bookstore down the street, has been especially supportive. He's been in business for about 5 years and has become a kind of mentor to me. We've been hanging out outside of work too, grabbing beers after closing or watching games together on slow Sunday afternoons. There might be something there, but I'm taking it slow. After all the family drama, it's nice to just have an uncomplicated friendship. Last week, I ran into my sister at the grocery store. It was awkward, to say the least. She looked terrible, tired and stressed. Part of me wanted to reach out to try and mend things, but then I remembered her threats and accusations and I just couldn't. We made eye contact, and for a moment, I thought she might say something. Instead, she turned and walked away. I stood there for a while, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. My mom hasn't tried to contact me since that angry voicemail. I've thought about reaching out, but every time I pick up the phone, I just don't know what to say. How do you start a conversation with someone who's declared you dead to them? So for now, we're at an impasse. On a brighter note, the cafe is starting to turn a profit. It's small, but it's there. I've been able to hire 2 part-time employees, which has taken some of the pressure off me. I'm even starting to think about expanding the menu, maybe adding some simple dinner options for the evening crowd. My grandmother comes by the cafe at least once a week. She always orders a cappuccino and a slice of lemon cake and sits for hours reading or chatting with other customers. She's become something of a fixture, and customers love her. It's nice to have her support, both emotionally and literally as a loyal customer. I know this isn't the happy family reconciliation some people might have hoped for. The reality is messier and more complicated. There are days when I miss my family terribly, when I wonder if I made the right choices. But then I look at what I've built, at the life I'm creating for myself, and I know I'm on the right path. I feel like I'm finally building a life that's truly mine, surrounded by people who value me for who I am. It's not perfect, but it's real, and that's worth something. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someday my mom and sister will come around, or maybe this rift is permanent. Either way, I'm learning to be okay with uncertainty and to focus on the things I can control. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time. I'm pouring my energy into my cafe, into building new relationships, and into becoming the person I want to be. Not the person my family expected me to be. It's a work in progress, but aren't we all? Now on to the next story. Story 3. Was I buying my fiancée her dream house? Then she demanded I add her brother to the deed. Turns out he's actually her ex and first love, and that she's been lying for years. I, 30M, have been with my fiancée, 26F, for over 5 years now. Thea and I met at a restaurant. She had just started working behind the counter, and I had gone with my buddy to place my order. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was absolutely stunning and had the sweetest voice. After placing our order, I kept telling my friend about how gorgeous she was and how I couldn't stop thinking about her. He told me that I should just ask her out. However, I was nervous and afraid of being rejected. I grabbed a pen and paper, wrote down my name and number, and went to collect our food when it was ready. When I paid, I slipped the note to her, and she blushed when she realized that I had written my number down. She called me that evening and we talked for hours. It was like we had known each other all our lives. She's the first girl I have ever met that I have truly been happy with. She makes me smile endlessly. My parents and my sister have met her also, and they like her as much as I do. Just to give you some background, Tina and I come from really different backgrounds. Tina's childhood was tough. She grew up as an orphan because her mom abandoned her as a baby. No name, No information, no birthday, nothing. As she grew up, she never got adopted. She had to go through a bunch of foster homes and has told me how horrible they were for her. Tina has one cousin, brother Kyle, who apparently found out about her existence and got in touch with her when she was 16 years old. She and her brother are extremely close from the get-go. My girlfriend had made it very clear to me that her brother was the most important person in her life, and I understood since I had an older sister as well, so I understand that sibling bond. The tricky part was that she would often cancel our plans at a moment's notice to hang out with him if he asked. She mentioned they both suffered from separation anxiety, and it showed in the way she prioritized him over our plans. There were times when we would discuss future trips, initially thinking it would be just the two of us, but then she would tell me how she wanted to bring her brother along. Once, during a date, he called for no apparent reason, and she stressed out, feeling the need to rush back home because apparently her brother wanted her there. She also made it clear that he was her number one, leaving me with this unsettling feeling that even if we were married, I might still be second to her brother. It was almost like I had to compete with him, which was a strange sensation. To add to it, he would frequently call her during our dates, resulting in 15 to 30-minute phone conversations that interrupted our time together. My girlfriend lived in a tiny apartment with 2 other roommates when I first met her. Her brother, Kyle, would always find an excuse to crash in. One time, when I FaceTimed her, I saw him sleeping right next to her. I felt extremely uncomfortable and questioned her about it. She told me that her brother usually slept on their sofa in the living room, but that night he did not want to be alone since he was going through a bad breakup. Later, I told her that I did not feel comfortable having her share a bed with another man, even if he was her cousin. She argued with me that the sofa bed was uncomfortable and her bed was bigger for the 2 of them. I told her that it was weird for him to keep crashing at her place when I didn't even do that, and instead of going to a friend's place, he wanted to spend the night with her. Tina brushed it off, saying I was overthinking it and that it was not a big deal. She told me I wouldn't understand because I was not that close to my sibling compared to Tina's childhood. Mine was comparatively better. I grew up in a wealthy household and had 2 loving parents. I had an older sister that I was close to also. Hence, when I found out about Tina's childhood, it broke my heart that she never got a chance to grow up in a stable home. This is why I always tried to give her as much love and affection as I could. She and I had a happy relationship, so we decided to move in after we dated for 7 months. She told me how her lease was ending, and because I lived in my own house and was paying my mortgage, she asked me if she could move in with me. From the very beginning, I have always financially supported her since I have a really nice job. I earn 6 figures and she has been aware of this. Initially, I did want to ask her to split the rent, but then I felt bad about it, so I let it go. She was still studying during this time, so I ended up covering all her expenses, books, daily needs like food and gas, you name it. Honestly, it wasn't exactly my favorite thing, but I loved her, and she genuinely needed the help. I kept reassuring myself that it would pay off once we both graduated, landed good jobs, and became more financially independent. However, conflicts would pop up periodically. I felt like, since I was the one shelling out for everything, I should have the final say in decisions. Once, Tina invited Kyle up for the weekend as she wanted me to bond with him since he had been wanting to come and get drunk for a while. I agreed and bought a few cans for him. When her brother came over, he completely ignored me and went in straight to hug Tina. They hugged unusually long, and then Tina introduced him to me. I smiled at him politely, while he had no emotions on his face. He then sat down on our sofa and ordered Tina to get him a few drinks. I used the word order because he literally did exactly that. I was quite taken aback because I had never ever spoken to Tina that way. Throughout the night, her brother was a massive jerk to me the entire time. For example, he looked around our house and told me how I probably was a lazy bum who depended on my dad for everything. I clarified that I worked hard in college to get my cushy job and that I was paying the mortgage of his house all on my own. He then scoffed and started to bring up how he had recently been promoted. For context, he worked at a restaurant for the past 8 years and had been promoted as the manager there. As Tina and I congratulated him, he completely ignored me again and told Tina how he wanted to take her out for dinner, since it had been ages, since just the 2 of them had hung out, and how he missed going for long drives with her. Tina agreed, and they started talking about all their good times, which made me very uncomfortable to hear. However, my girlfriend noticed I wasn't having fun and was being quiet, so we went over to my room to talk things out. Our discussion apparently took too long, and her brother barged into our bedroom, screaming for Tina and saying how he missed her. Tina assured him that we would be right out, but he asked us to just hurry back. In my frustration, I angrily told him to go away. I was really getting frustrated with how clingy he was around Tina, and it boggled my mind that she didn't see this. After sorting things out, we decided to go back as I didn't want to keep my girlfriend from her brother. She stopped to use the bathroom and I waited in the hall. From there, I could hear her brother yelling at our TV, and he sounded completely drunk. This is when I noticed that he had been drinking continuously since the time he came into our place and was almost 6 cans down. When Tina came out of the washroom, he started to tell her how he wished they could have met at a bar and had a good time together since this was boring and he wanted to go out. Tina must have also noticed that he was quite drunk, so she told him that he should rest for a bit since he had a car. Her brother drunkenly went on to say how he hated the fact that she was with me and how he wished I never came into his life. I was pissed, and I honestly did not care what motivated him to say this. I demanded to know what his problem was since clearly there was no brother in this world who was so involved in his sister's life. But he responded by yelling and attacking me. Now, I am 6 feet 3 inches and much taller than him, so I had to hold myself back from seriously damaging him. Tina was begging me to not hurt him while he kept screaming obscenities at me. I gave him just one pinch and he was knocked out cold. Tina screamed that I had killed him, but he was only unconscious, and she checked his breathing. I told her that he could sleep it off on the sofa until he felt better. Tina then turned to me and told me that what I had done was unforgivable. I told her if that was the case, then she was welcome to leave me. I watched her eyes well up in tears, but I was too tired to argue with her, so I went up to my bedroom and just fell asleep. The next day, when I woke up, the brother was nowhere to be found. When I asked Tina, she told me that he wanted her to apologize to me for last night and that he was not going to be pressing any charges against me. I scoffed and told her that her brother was lucky that I did not press any charges against him because he was the one who attacked me drunk. Tina brushed it off and told me that she was sorry for getting pissed at me last night. I accepted her apology. Since that night, Kyle has always avoided me as much as he can. Obviously, Tina continued to see him every weekend, but he never ever came in front of me. By the 3rd year of my relationship with Tina, I was seriously worn out from being the sole financial backbone in the house. She would basically expect me to handle all her school-related expenses, even though she had her own savings from all the part-time jobs she had done. Around the same time, I started noticing how she would start acting entitled, as if all my support was given. When she finally got an internship, I thought, well, now she could be a bit more financially independent. However, she would splurge her money on luxury items like shoes or handbags. She had tons of shoes, even though she would hardly wear them, and a couple of high-priced handbags. I was still stuck covering all her basics. We began fighting a lot, with arguments boiling down to her telling me not to dictate her choices and me likening her to a spoiled child. I felt obligated to care for her. Almost a year after her graduation, she still had not landed any job. Her self-esteem was wrecked. In the initial 5 months post-graduation, she had given it her all, but the constant rejections probably took a toll. What really irked me was that I had been suggesting she could have taken a part-time job during this time to make some money, but she never went for it. During this time, even though she was not earning a penny, she would constantly spend money on her brother or even send him $1,000 every month. If I questioned her, she would tell me how he needed help and that I was earning more than enough anyway, so I should not be selfish. This would really piss me off since she was sending my money without permission and expected me to be fine with it. Admittedly, I didn't make the situation any better. Frustration from supporting her and her brother had been building up inside me for quite some time, and it all came pouring out. The breaking point came when, on the night before her school loan and phone bill payments were due, she called me asking for help. I lost my cool, yelled, and called her an ungrateful person who just used me for money without doing anything for herself. I told her our relationship was a sham, that I deserved better. A true partner, not a spoiled daughter. I told her that I had been contemplating breaking up with her. She immediately started sobbing and apologizing to me. She told me how she was going to do better and how she had no idea that I felt this way. She felt terrible for what I had been going through. Fortunately, ever since that conversation, she kept true to her words. She started looking for another job. She did not help her brother out as much as she did before. Once she got a job, she started to contribute to the bills. For the first time, I felt much better in our relationship, knowing that she was now an almost equal partner. I decided to propose to Tina in September last year, with the aim of tying the knot in June this year. She accepted my proposal, and we posted about it on social media. However, when she was going to visit her brother the weekend before, I noticed that she had removed her wedding ring. When I questioned her, she told me how her brother was very sensitive and that she would gently break the news of our engagement to him. I laughed and asked her why this was even such a big deal, but she told me not to interfere, saying that he was her family and she knew how to handle him. This was true, so I let it go. I wanted to do something nice for me and Tina, so after checking my finances, as I realized that I could easily buy a house for us, the house I currently lived in I could give out for rent and earn some money on the side. I wanted to buy this house as a wedding gift for both of us and start fresh with Tina. I even talked with a realtor who could help us check out some beautiful properties. Tina was pleasantly surprised when I broke this news to her. She hugged me and told me how she could not wait to start the next chapter of life with me. Over the months, we have been searching for our perfect house. Tina had a lot of opinions about these houses and was not ready to lock down. However, in the end, we managed to find our dream home with a huge backyard, which is exactly what we wanted. It is also just 1.5 hours away from my office, and Tina mostly works from home, so we are good to go. Now, because I was buying this house for us, I was obviously keeping my name and Tina's name on the house deed. However, Tina had an issue with this. She demanded that since I already have one house under my name, I should keep her name and her brother's name for the second house. I was taken aback. I asked her if she was joking because why would I include her brother's name in our house deed? Tina told me that she had no assets to her name since she had no parents and told me how insecure she felt that she was bringing in nothing to our marriage, so she wanted her name in the house. As for her brother, she told me how important he was to her, so she wanted me to include his name since he was also going to be family with me. I refused and we had a huge fight. In the heat of the moment, I told her how weird it was for her to always bring up her brother and that even though I had a sibling, her relationship with her brother seemed to be crossing boundaries. Hearing this, Tina burst into tears and walked away from me. Later that night, she again brought up how she expected me to add her name and her brother's name in our house deed, since it was the right thing to do, and how much it would mean to her if I included her family. She would keep pushing the issue, and I would just shut her down. The tension between us grew as the discussion circled back to this demand. It felt like a never-ending loop, with her expressing the importance of including her brother in our home ownership and me struggling to comprehend why this was even a consideration. I was caught in a whirlwind of confusion, frustration, and a growing sense of unease about the whole situation. Then, last week, I ran into Tina's best friend, Betty, at a coffee shop near my office. Turns out she had an interview with a company nearby. Now, I have met Betty several times, and she and Tina have been friends since college. Tina doesn't really have a lot of friends, so Betty and she were really close. Betty congratulated me on my upcoming wedding and teased me that I was now going to be a married man. I awkwardly smiled. She probed about our wedding plans, and I found myself struggling to answer truthfully. During this time, I had been thinking if I had even done the right thing to ask Tina to marry me since we were having continuous fights about the house deed. I could not even talk about this with anyone since I didn't want my sister or my parents to have a bad impression of Tina. Sensing my unease, Betty pressed for more information. Unable to contain myself, I decided to spill the beans about Tina's strange request regarding the house deed. I told her how Tina was demanding me to include her brother's name and refusing to back down. Betty's eyes widened with surprise, and she told me that this was really strange. I told her that this was exactly what I felt. For the first time, I felt validated that someone could see how weird my fiancé's request was because it felt like I was going crazy. Betty then hesitatingly asked me if I knew the full story about Tina and her brother, Kyle. I shook my head in confusion. This is when Betty spilled the beans. Apparently, Tina's so-called brother is not actually her brother. You see, when Tina was growing up in different foster homes, she met Kyle, who was also an orphan. They quickly became very close and started introducing each other as brother and sister to other people. They had no family, so pretending to be each other's siblings gave them some sort of comfort and stability. However, when they grew up, they realized that other people found their relationship very odd. Kyle would always interfere in Tina's relationships, and her exes didn't like having him around. So this is why she started to tell people that Kyle and she were cousins, so people would think that they were actually related. This would mean that they could hang out and spend time with each other without their partners having an issue with it. Betty told me that Kyle's girlfriends would also have a problem with Tina, but when they would realize that she was a sister, they would not mind her much. As Betty shared these revelations, a mix of shock, confusion, and a hint of betrayal swept over me. The foundation of trust, which I believed my relationship was built on, began to crumble. Betty went on to tell me how she thought I already knew this since Tina was engaged to me, and she expected Tina to have come clean to me by now. I shook my head and told her that Tina never said any of this to me, and I had been living with the assumption that she was going to hang out with her brother every weekend. Betty nodded her head in understanding and told me that she had also found their relationship to be too close, but it was not her place to judge them, so she always kept her opinions to herself. Since this conversation with Betty, my head has been reeling. I am trying to act as normally as I can in front of Tina because I don't know how to bring this up. I am at a loss for words, and there is a lot to think about. I am afraid to bring this up and find out how she has been lying to me our entire relationship. This might be the end of us because I don't know if I can ever trust her again. I'm afraid of ending my relationship with my fiancé because she has been lying to me about her brother. Should I give her the benefit of the doubt for the sake of the years we have spent together? Please, Reddit, help me. Update 1. Thanks for all of the advice. I know how to proceed from here. I have always thought of ways to turn a negative situation into a positive situation and, most importantly, to not act or feed off of negative emotions. It was difficult to see how to do that for the past few days. For the majority of those who are telling me to end the relationship, I believe that it is the best course of action. Before that, I need to have an open discussion with Tina and hear her side of the story. Otherwise, it is going to bug me my entire life about why she lied to me. I have also reached out to my parents and told them everything. My parents have told me the same thing that everyone in the comments section has been saying. They don't want me to go through with my marriage, and they're glad that Tina and I are not bound to each other through property or finances. So it will be easy for me to break off things. I will update you once I confront her. Update 2. So I finally sat down to talk to Tina yesterday. Confronting Tina was both nerve-wracking and necessary. I needed answers, and I owed it to myself and our relationship to get to the bottom of things. I did not mince words and told her up front that I had met Betty, and she had revealed everything about her and Kyle's relationship. Tina's eyes widened in shock as she asked what exactly did I mean by that. I told her that I knew she and Kyle were not cousins and he was not her brother. Tina looked taken aback, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. She stammered for a moment before attempting to explain. She admitted to the lie about Kyle being her brother but justified it as a coping mechanism from their difficult past. She told me how, growing up in foster care, they had found solace in creating a bond that was more than just friendship. When they grew up, they realized that people judged them, so to avoid judgment and interference from others, they decided to present themselves as cousins to avoid unnecessary complications in their relationships. Listening to her, I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and sadness. I couldn't comprehend why Tina could not have just been honest with me. It wasn't about Kyle not being her biological brother, but about the years of deception and the strain it put on our relationship. I told her that we were about to get married, and she had knowingly continued to lie about him being her brother. When I pressed her about the demand to include Kyle in the house deed, Tina's justification spiraled into an emotional plea. She claimed that he had been her constant support and anchor, and including him was a symbol of what families do for each other. I told her that I was going to marry her and start a family with her, but instead of considering me as her family, she wanted to include a guy she met in foster care and called him her brother. Tina started to cry and told me how their relationship was just purely platonic. This made me laugh, and I told her that the way Kyle behaved around her was not platonic in any way. I questioned her if she had been sleeping behind my back with him all this time, but she vehemently refused. I grilled her and asked her if she and he had never done anything romantic. Breaking down, she finally admitted that he had been her first boyfriend and they were each other's first. She told me how it was for a very short while and they broke off immediately when they realized that they were not right for each other. She kept emphasizing how they just platonically loved each other now. However, my patience wore thin, and I could no longer accept these excuses. I expressed my disgust at the lies that she had been telling throughout our relationship. I told her that I could no longer be with her after knowing what I knew. This made her cry even more, and she started saying how this was why she had been hiding this secret for so long. She tried to guilt-trip me by saying how I was also leaving her like her mother did years ago and how she could not live without me. I told her I couldn't continue the relationship, that the foundation of trust had crumbled irreparably. At that moment, I no longer cared about her feelings and asked her to give me back my engagement ring. The ring once belonged to my grandma and was a family heirloom. I had given this to her with my mother's permission, thinking that she and I could start a family together. However, now that I was done with her, I didn't want her to take the ring with her. She begged me not to break off the engagement, but I stood my ground. Then Tina started to refuse to give me back the ring, telling me how I had given this to her, so now this belonged to her. I reminded her that what she had done to me amounted to catfishing since she had depended on me financially throughout the relationship and then lied about her so-called brother. I told her she was not leaving my house until I had my ring back. Reluctantly, she removed the ring while crying and accusing me of being heartless. I asked her to pack her bags and leave my house within the hour. Despite her pleas and promises to change, I stood firm in my decision. The person I thought I knew was a facade, and I did not want anything to do with her anymore. Desperate, Tina called Kyle to pick her up. However, when he learned that I had become aware of their relationship, he refused to get involved, perhaps knowing that if she showed up at my place I would give him a serious ass-whooping. Tina had no choice but to call an Uber. As she left, she told me that she was sorry for everything and that she would wait for me. I ignored her and shut my door in her face. The aftermath has left me feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Betrayal, heartbreak, but also a newfound clarity. It hurts me that my dream girl turned out to be such a fraud, and that in my 30s, I have to start dating all over again. However, I am glad that I found this out before we got married or bought the house. Otherwise, this would have been a much bigger show. Update 3. Thank you to everyone who has been sending me uplifting messages for the past month. To those who shared their own infidelity stories or offered advice, thank you. Your words have been instrumental for me in navigating this journey. I will be going for therapy as many of you have advised. I understand that with time this pain will subside, but it still hurts. Thankfully, my sister and my parents have been checking in on me regularly. I have blocked Tina from everywhere, and I have changed my door locks like some of you have advised. I have also installed cameras around my house, just in case, though I doubt that Kyle or Tina will ever show up. This will be my final update for now, since I don't want to be reminded of her betrayal anymore. Now on to the next story. Story 4. My husband divorced me because he missed being single, but a year and a half later he wanted to come back, but I refused to accept him. I, 34F, was married to my ex-husband, Jake, 36M, for 10 years before our divorce. We have 2 children together, Emma, 8F, and Liam, 6M. Jake and I met in college and dated for 4 years before getting married. We had what I thought was a happy life together. Jake had a close group of friends, Mike, Tom, Chris, and Dan, who he'd known since school. They were all unmarried and childless. Jake often went out with his friends for what they called men's day out. I never had a problem with this, as I believed it was important for him to maintain his friendships. These outings usually involved watching sports, going to bars, or engaging in outdoor activities like hiking or fishing. One evening, about a year and a half ago, Jake came home from one of these outings acting strangely. He was quiet and distant, which was unusual for him. When I asked if everything was okay, he dropped a bombshell. He wanted a divorce. I was completely blindsided. We hadn't been having any major problems that I was aware of, and I couldn't understand where this was coming from. I asked him repeatedly why he wanted a divorce, but he was evasive at first. Finally, after much pushing, he told me that he missed being a single, free man. He said he felt tied down by marriage and family life and wanted to experience the freedom his friends had. I was devastated. We had built a life together, had 2 beautiful children, and I thought we were happy. I couldn't comprehend how he could throw it all away because he was envious of his single friends. The news of our impending divorce caused a huge uproar in both our families. My parents were furious with Jake, while his family was confused. Some of Jake's family members, particularly his mother and sister, started implying that I must have done something wrong. They suggested that I might have been neglecting Jake or not meeting his needs in some way. This hurt me deeply, as I had always tried to be a good wife and mother. Despite attempts at counseling and mediation, Jake was adamant about going through with the divorce. He moved out of our house and into an apartment. We agreed on shared custody of the children, but they primarily lived with me. The divorce process was painful and messy. Jake's friends rallied around him, supporting his decision and helping him embrace his new single lifestyle. Meanwhile, I was left to pick up the pieces of our shattered family life. I had to explain to our children why Daddy wasn't living with us anymore, which was heart-wrenching. In the months following the divorce, I focused on healing and creating a stable environment for Emma and Liam. I threw myself into my work as a marketing executive and spent quality time with the kids. My friends and family were incredibly supportive during this difficult period. I started seeing a therapist to work through my feelings of betrayal and abandonment. It was a long process, but gradually I began to regain my self-esteem and confidence. I even started to enjoy aspects of my new independence, although I missed the family unit we once had. About a year after our divorce was finalized, I noticed a shift in Jake's behavior during our interactions for child handovers. He seemed less enthusiastic about his single life and more sad when saying goodbye to the kids. I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming he was just having a moment of regret. Then, about a month ago, Jake showed up at my doorstep unannounced. He looked nervous and asked if we could talk. Reluctantly, I agreed, and what he told me left me speechless. Jake confessed that he had made a huge mistake in divorcing me. He said he missed me and the kids terribly and wanted us to get back together. He explained that his decision to divorce had been heavily influenced by his friends' constant bragging about their single lifestyles. He admitted that he had been brainwashed by their tales of freedom and excitement. However, Jake went on to say that in the past year, all of his friends had gotten married one by one, as they settled into married life and started prioritizing their new families. Jake realized the value of what he had thrown away. He said he now understood that the freedom of single life was nothing compared to the joy and fulfillment of family life. I listened to Jake's apology and explanation in stunned silence. Part of me was touched that he had realized his mistake and wanted to reconcile, but a larger part of me was angry and hurt. I couldn't forget the pain he had put me and our children through. The memory of explaining to Emma and Liam why their daddy was leaving us was still fresh in my mind. After Jake finished speaking, I took a deep breath and told him that while I appreciated his apology, I couldn't take him back. I said that he had made his choice and now he had to live with the consequences. I told him that we could continue to co-parent our children amicably, but our romantic relationship was over for good. Jake looked devastated but nodded in understanding. He left, and I closed the door feeling a mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, and surprisingly, a sense of empowerment. Now I'm questioning my decision. Some friends and family members think I should give Jake another chance for the sake of our children. Others support my decision to stand my ground. I can't help but wonder. Am I the a-hole for refusing to take my ex-husband back after he divorced me because he missed being single? Date 1. It's been about 2 months since my original post, and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their comments and support. Reading through your responses helped me gain perspective and strengthened my resolve. After my conversation with Jake, he seemed to accept my decision at first. However, About a week later, he started calling and texting frequently, pleading for another chance. He even enlisted his family to try and convince me to reconsider. Jake's mother called me saying I was being selfish and denying our children a chance to have their family back together. His sister sent me long messages about forgiveness and the importance of family. This pressure from his family brought back painful memories of how they had blamed me for the divorce initially. I stood firm in my decision, which led to some tense exchanges during child handovers. Jake would try to engage me in conversation about us while I tried to keep things focused on the kids. It was emotionally draining, and I could see it was starting to affect Emma and Liam. Emma, being older, picked up on the tension and started asking questions. One evening, she asked me directly if Daddy was coming back home. I sat her down and explained as gently as I could that Daddy and I wouldn't be getting back together, but that we both loved her and Liam very much. She seemed sad but understanding. Liam, being younger, was less aware of the situation but sensed the emotional undercurrents. Seeing how this was affecting our children, I decided to take action. I contacted our divorce lawyer and requested that we revise our co-parenting agreement. I proposed that all communication between Jake and me be limited to matters directly related to the children and that we use a co-parenting app for most of our interactions. This would help maintain clear boundaries and reduce opportunities for Jake to pressure me about reconciliation. Jake was initially resistant to this idea, but after I explained how his behavior was impacting the kids, he reluctantly agreed. We met with our lawyers and drafted a new, more detailed co-parenting plan. This included guidelines for communication, a clear schedule for visitations, and protocols for making decisions about the children's education and health care. Implementing this new system has been challenging but beneficial. The co-parenting app has made it easier to track schedules and share information about the kids without getting into personal discussions. The clear boundaries have reduced tension during handovers, which has noticeably improved Emma and Liam's mood. On the personal front, I've continued with therapy, which has been incredibly helpful. My therapist suggested I start journaling as a way to process my emotions, and it's been a revelation. Writing down my thoughts and feelings has helped me gain clarity and work through some of the lingering pain from the divorce. I've also started to focus more on self-care and personal growth. I joined a local gym and have been taking yoga classes, which has been great for managing stress. I've reconnected with old friends and even made some new ones through a single-parent support group. As for Jake, he seems to have finally accepted that we won't be getting back together. He's been more respectful of boundaries lately and has been focusing on being a good dad during his time with the kids. He mentioned in a recent message that he started seeing a therapist too, which I think is a positive step. My friends and family have been incredibly supportive throughout this process. My best friend, Sarah, has been a rock, offering childcare when I need a break and lending an ear when I need to vent. My parents have also been amazing, often taking the kids for weekends to give me some time to myself. Looking back, I feel more confident than ever in my decision not to reconcile with Jake. While it hasn't been easy, I can see personal growth and positive changes in my life. The kids are adjusting well to our new normal, and I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. I'm grateful for all the advice and support I've received from this community. It's been a challenging journey, but I feel I'm on the right path. Thank you all for helping me stay strong and true to myself. Update 2. Hello everyone. It's been about 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some developments in my situation. The new co-parenting arrangement has been working well overall. Jake and I have settled into a routine, and our communications have remained focused on the children. The tension that was present earlier has significantly decreased, which has had a positive impact on Emma and Liam. Emma has been doing much better emotionally. She's excelling in school and has joined the school's drama club, which she loves. Liam has also adjusted well and recently started taking swimming lessons. Seeing them thrive despite the changes in our family structure has been incredibly rewarding. About 3 months ago, I decided to start dating again. It was a big step and I was nervous at first. I created a profile on a dating app and went on a few casual dates. Most were pleasant but didn't lead to anything serious. However, about a month ago, I met someone named Alex. Alex is kind, funny, and great with kids. We've been on several dates, and things are going well. I introduced him to Emma and Liam recently, making it clear that he's mommy's friend. The kids seemed to like him, which was a relief. When Jake found out I was dating, he didn't take it well initially. He became moody during handovers and made a few passive-aggressive comments. However, after a stern reminder about our agreement to keep things civil and focused on the kids, he's been making an effort to be more respectful. Jake's friends, the ones who were originally all single, have all settled into married life now. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they often get together for couples dinners, which Jake isn't part of. It seems the dynamic of their friendship has changed significantly. On a personal note, I've continued with therapy and my self-improvement journey. I completed a digital marketing course to enhance my skills at work, which led to a promotion. The extra income has been helpful in providing for the kids and allowing me to save for their future. I've also been working on forgiveness, not for Jake's sake, but for my own peace of mind. My therapist has been guiding me through this process, and while it's challenging, I can feel some of the anger and resentment I've been carrying start to dissipate. Jake, for his part, seems to be making positive changes too. He's been more consistent with his visitations and has started taking parenting classes. He told me during a recent handover that he's grateful for the time he gets with the kids and thanked me for being a good co-parent despite our past. While things are generally going well, there have been some challenges. Balancing work, kids, and a new relationship isn't easy. There are days when I feel overwhelmed, but I'm learning to ask for help when I need it. As for my decision not to reconcile with Jake, I remain confident that it was the right choice. While our relationship has improved as co-parents, the trust that was broken can't be fully repaired. I'm focused on moving forward and creating a happy, stable life for myself and my children. Thank you all again for your support and advice. Your words have been a source of strength throughout this journey. I'm cautiously optimistic about the future and excited to see what it holds for me and my kids. Update 3. Hello again, everyone. It's been about a year since my last update, and I wanted to share how things have progressed. Life has settled into a new rhythm, and I'm happy to report that things are going well. Emma is now 10 and Liam is 8, and they're both thriving. Emma's passion for drama has grown, and she recently landed the lead role in her school play. Liam has become quite the swimmer and joined a local kids' swim team. My relationship with Alex has continued to develop positively. We've been together for about a year and a half now, and things are getting serious. He's been wonderful with the kids, always respectful of their relationship with Jake, and never trying to replace him as their father. We've discussed moving in together, but we're taking it slow for the kids' sake. Jake and I have maintained our co-parenting relationship. It's not always easy, but we've managed to keep things civil and focused on the children. Jake has continued with therapy and parenting classes, which has noticeably improved his relationship with Emma and Liam. He's become more involved in their lives, attending school events and extracurricular activities regularly. About 6 months ago, Jake met someone new. Her name is Olivia, and she has a child of her own from a previous relationship. When Jake introduced her to the kids, I'll admit I felt a twinge of something. Not jealousy exactly, but a complex mix of emotions. However, seeing how happy the kids were and how kind Olivia was to them, I realized this was a positive development for our family dynamic. Olivia and I have developed a cordial relationship. We're not best friends, but we can chat amicably during school events or when she's with Jake during handovers. Having another adult in the picture who cares about the kids' well-being has actually made co-parenting easier in some ways. Jake and I had a conversation recently where he apologized again for the pain he caused with the divorce. This time, instead of feeling angry or hurt, I found I was able to accept his apology genuinely. The forgiveness work I've been doing in therapy has really paid off. We were able to have an honest discussion about our past and our hopes for co-parenting in the future. It was a healing moment for both of us. On the professional front, I've continued to excel at work. The promotion I received has opened up new opportunities, and I'm now leading a team on a major project. It's challenging but rewarding, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished. Alex has been incredibly supportive of my career and helps out with the kids when I have late nights at work. Seeing him build relationships with Emma and Liam has been heartwarming. They've started to open up to him more, sharing their thoughts and seeking his advice on things. There have been some challenges, of course. Balancing work, kids, and a relationship isn't always easy. There have been moments of stress and doubt, but overall, I feel more confident and content than I have in years. Looking back at my original post, I can see how far I've come. The pain and anger I felt then have largely subsided. While I don't regret my decision not to reconcile with Jake, I'm grateful that we've been able to build a positive co-parenting relationship. I've learned so much about myself through this journey. I've discovered strength I didn't know I had, and I've grown in ways I never expected. I'm excited about the future and the life I'm building for myself and my children. Thank you all once again for your support and advice throughout this process. Your words have been a source of comfort and strength. To anyone going through a similar situation, know that it does get better. It takes time and work, but you can come out stronger on the other side. Now on to the next story. Story 5. Cared for my ex-husband's sick mom like she was my own mother. But then my ex cheated and lied to her about me stealing money while draining her savings, resulting in me being disowned. I, 27F, am a recently divorced mother of 2. My ex-husband, Dylan, 27M, and I were married for 5 years until we divorced last year. I've been through tons of stuff these past few months, dealing with the kids and the divorce, in addition to the situation with my ex-mill. I was trying to deal with it as best I could until my ex-mill came knocking at my door a few days ago, apologizing for everything. Let me get you all caught up. Dylan and I have known each other since we were kids. Our moms were best friends, and I mean best friends. They had grown up with each other, went to school together, and even got married and had kids around the same time. It was one of those rare friendships that come once in a lifetime. They were each other's ride or die, as we say these days. So it was obvious that Dylan and I also got super close. Our moms would take us on playdates with each other. They'd take turns dropping us at school and picking us up from practice while growing up. It was as if we had 2 mothers who loved and took care of us equally throughout our childhood. Dylan and I were always coupled together. It was as if people almost knew that we'd end up together. Not to mention our moms joked about it all the time. They used to say that Dylan and I getting together would finally make them related in some way. I honestly hated when they would poke fun at us, mainly because I had a massive crush on Dylan and would get embarrassed every time they teased us, especially when it was clear that 8-year-old him had other priorities like basketball and cars and wasn't in the least bit interested in me. 8-year-old me would have never believed that our parents were right and that one day we would actually end up together. Little 8-year-old me would probably have also had a stroke if she found out how our relationship ultimately turned out. My ex-mill, let's call her Glenda, 63F, was like my second mother. My mom worked a lot and came home late in the evenings, so I'd spend most of my time after school at Glenda's house. She had always wanted a daughter but only had Dylan, so she would always call me the daughter she never had. I truly loved her as a mother. She would buy me my favorite treats, and every Christmas I was sure that she would knit me a new cardigan. That's just how she was. Things were just great until my mom got diagnosed with cancer when I was 14. Came as a shock to all of us, and I remember that I felt like my world was crumbling around me when I first heard the news. It wasn't looking good. The cancer was diagnosed at a late stage, and there wasn't much anyone could do except hope and pray that the chemotherapy would work. For the next 2 years, my mom weakened in front of my eyes. I was so used to her being so energetic and full of life that it hurt me to see her just wasting away. She went for all her chemo sessions and began losing all her hair. She lost tons of weight and became very frail. During this time, I was a mess. I was so worried about my mom, and Glenda was the only one I could speak to because I knew that she was one of the few people who understood how I felt. My dad barely had any time to be sad. He was working overtime to pay for all the medical bills, and the last thing I wanted to do was put more pressure on him. Glenda took care of everything. She became my mother's caretaker and made sure that I didn't have to worry about anything and focus on school. She made all the food, made sure my mom took her meds, and made sure that I was doing as well as I could considering the situation. After battling cancer like a warrior for 2 years, my mother peacefully passed away surrounded by all her loved ones when I was 16. It was one of the worst days of my life. I remember feeling as if I would never be happy again because I had lost my best friend. My dad, Glenda, and I grieved together. Glenda helped me through it. I remember that for a few weeks after my mom passed, I stopped eating, showering, and going to school. Glenda sat me down and told me that my mother would never want to see me like this and that she would curse her from heaven if she did nothing to cheer me up. It was the first time I smiled in months. Over the next couple of years, I started hanging out at Glenda's every day. She always knew how to make me feel better, and she was one of the few people that I trusted and loved. I got even closer to Dylan. He was in his bad boy phase and was hanging around with the wrong sort of people, but somehow this made him even more attractive to me. I blame the teenage hormones. He also began taking an interest in me, and I was very flattered. We started hanging out, and it became clear that we had started developing feelings for each other. But even back then, it was as if I loved him more than he loved me. We'd be together all the time in private, but in public he'd act pretty indifferent to me. I didn't mind too much because he kept telling me how much he loved me and how he was planning on marrying me when we got older. Pro tip, ladies. This type of behavior is a massive red flag. A man who truly loves you will never be embarrassed to show you off publicly. I learned this the hard way. I did feel bad sometimes when Dylan would ignore me. I felt as if I was not worthy enough for him to fully accept me. I based my entire self-worth on whether he liked me or not. Again, this is a very harmful mindset to have. Never base your self-worth on anyone's opinion except your own. We started dating secretly for 2 whole years, and there were many times when I just wanted to let everyone know that we were together. Dylan would sometimes flirt with other girls right in front of me, and then when I'd get mad about it, he'd tell me that I was making a big deal and that he was just trying to keep up with his image. Now, when I look back at his behavior, it's sad to think how little I thought of myself. I was still in a very emotionally vulnerable state and needed comfort, which he provided. I disregarded all his red flags and let him walk all over me just because I didn't want to let him go. For the times he did make me feel good. I was so naive. I should have known better. When we were 19, I had finally had enough of being sidelined and practically pleaded with him to come out publicly with our relationship. After ages, he finally agreed. Glenda was the happiest when she found out. She embraced me and said that she always knew that we'd end up together because it was fate. Glenda knew that her son wasn't exactly the best and was hanging with the wrong sort of people, and somewhere deep down she felt as if being in a relationship with him would help him change. Honestly, I felt the same way. I truly believed that I could positively change Dylan and make him a better person. Dylan kept drinking. He dropped out of high school and could never hang on to a job for more than a few months. He spent most of his time hanging out with his gang friends. Since I had known him for ages, I believed that he still could turn his life around, and I felt that being in a serious relationship with me would help him get his act together. Needless to say, I was very wrong. No matter how much I tried to help Dylan, he reverted back to his old ways. I would constantly get him job interviews which he wouldn't attend. I enrolled him for courses so that he could gain more skills, but he never showed up. I sent him to therapy to help him get sober, but nothing worked. Meanwhile, I was in college and working double shifts to earn money to support the both of us. Glenda was constantly stressed because of Dylan and his antics. She worried herself sick about our future and at one point was actually scared that he was going to do something to himself. Another year passed, and Dylan went from bad to worse. I was beginning to think of ending things when our entire lives changed. Glenda suffered from a heart attack. I got a call in the middle of the night, and we rushed to the hospital. By God's grace, she was stable and had to be admitted for a few days. They ran a few more tests and found out that she was suffering from coronary heart disease and had very high blood pressure. In addition, she also suffered from arrhythmia, heart rhythm disorder, which, if left uncontrolled, could be fatal. The doctors said that she was lucky to even be alive. I thanked the Lord that she was okay, but I was still shocked that she was so unwell this whole time. The doctor put her on a strict diet. She had to do a certain amount of physical exercise daily as well as take a ton of medications. The main thing the doctor told us was that her heart was extremely fragile and she shouldn't be under any kind of stress because that could trigger another arrhythmia, and this time she wouldn't be as lucky. I was just grateful that she was alive. I was also the one who had to pay for all the hospital expenses because Dylan had nothing. I didn't mind because I would do anything for her. After we brought her back home, I noticed a drastic change in Dylan. I think this whole thing was a reality check for him. I could tell that he was completely shaken by the thought of losing his mom and that he became a completely different person. He started helping his mom every day, got an actual job, and started paying his share of the rent and bills. His attitude to me changed as well. For the first time, he was actually appreciating me, taking me out on dates and showering me with love. This had been a harrowing experience for all of us, but the fact that Dylan had changed for the better was the best thing that came out of it. In the months that followed, Dylan and I took good care of Glenda. We made sure that she followed her routine and took her for checkups to make sure everything was fine. I was so happy to see how involved Dylan was. I was even more attracted to him now. When we were 21, Dylan proposed. I said yes, and a year later we were married. Glenda was thrilled. I still remember the speech she gave at the wedding. She said that she had always thought of me as a daughter, and now that I was married to Dylan, it was official, and she couldn't be happier. She said the only thing she wished for was for my mom to see this because she would have been happier than ever. I graduated that same year and managed to secure a pretty well-paying job at a firm. It was quite a distance from the apartment that I shared with Dylan, which was closer to Glenda. However, the commute was getting too tedious for me, and even though I didn't want to go too far from her, we decided that it was best if we got an apartment closer to my work. Glenda was all for it, so we moved the following year. I was still uneasy being far away from Glenda, so I decided to keep a caretaker with her at all times. It was expensive, but it gave me peace of mind. Our first year of marriage was bliss. I loved this new and improved version of Dylan. He helped out with all the bills, even though he was earning significantly less than me. He did chores and was a great help. The fact that he was more romantic than ever was the cherry on top. Within the year, we were pregnant. This was a little unexpected because it was still so early in our marriage, but I felt secure enough to bring a baby into this world. Glenda was thrilled about becoming a grandma. I gave birth to my first daughter, Mary, and we started settling into parenthood. Now, being a parent is no easy task. It's a lifelong commitment, and the start is definitely rough. I immediately bonded with my daughter, and I didn't mind the sleepless nights and the stinky diapers. I enjoyed every aspect of it. Dylan, on the other hand, did not adapt that well. After the birth of our daughter, he barely helped take care of her. I was the one who did everything. When I confronted him about this, he said that he was scared of holding her and that this was not what he signed up for. He said that he had no idea that babies were this much work. I was startled. He was being so immature, and I was already dealing with so much as it is. His uninvolvement when it came to looking after Mary led to huge fights. At one point, I decided that there was no point in arguing and took care of her all by myself. To make matters worse, Dylan got fired from his job. Instead of finding a new one, he went back to his old ways and started hanging out at home. This time around, he stopped doing the chores and completely ignored Mary. I had to go back to work early for my maternity leave because we needed the money desperately. Dylan didn't want to look after Mary, so I had to hire a babysitter, despite him being at home. This was an added expense that we could not afford, but there was no other option. I contemplated asking Glenda to help take care of the baby, but she was already weak, and I didn't want to put her under more stress. Dylan started drinking again. He'd come back home absolutely soused and incoherent. Once again, I tried sending him to AA meetings, therapy, everything, but nothing seemed to work. He wasn't getting a job, and my patience was running thin. The biggest blow came when I found out that I was pregnant again. We didn't plan this, and there was no way we could afford another baby. I was the only one who was working, and we were barely scraping by. Mind you, I was paying for the babysitter, Glenda's caretaker, and Dylan's therapy in addition to the bills and rent. I was burning myself out while Dylan made absolutely no effort to change. There were huge cracks in our marriage now, and I was regretting marrying him. There were many times when I contemplated telling Glenda everything. She had always given me the best advice. I knew the doctor said that she shouldn't be under stress, and these matters would stress her beyond anything, so I kept my mouth shut. Whenever she called, I acted as if everything was fine. Even Dylan had the sense not to stress her out, so even he behaved in the same way. However, he was immature and not ready to take on the responsibility that came along with marriage and fatherhood. With another baby on the way, Dylan had worsened. He said that this was all a huge mistake and told me to get rid of the baby. I was appalled even to hear him suggest that. Yes, it was going to be difficult raising two kids, but things would be way easier if he took some initiative and got a job. We kept arguing all the time. He'd not come back home on most days, and the whole atmosphere at home was terrible, and it was beginning to affect Mary. I reached my breaking point when I caught him having an affair with our babysitter. I was not surprised. Neither was I hurt. I didn't love him anymore, and neither did he. I knew the only reason he was even with me was because I put a roof over his head and paid all his bills. He needed me. I didn't need him. In fact, my life would be easier without him mooching off of me. He didn't seem in the least bit guilty that he was cheating on me. Honestly, he was a pathetic excuse of a man, and I wish that I had left him ages ago. He was disgusting in all aspects. I decided to separate from him. He protested, saying that he needed me, when all he needed was my money, but this time I had had enough. I had no more feelings for him. All he was to me was my life's biggest regret. After a while, he gave up the act and told me that the only reason he married me was because I was a safe option that his mother approved of. He married me so that his mom would get off his back once and for all. I suppose he was trying to hurt me, but honestly, I didn't care. I was so fed up with him that I was relieved when he left with the babysitter. After giving birth to my younger daughter, we began the divorce proceedings. Dylan didn't want custody of the 2 kids, which was good because he wasn't capable of looking after them. Either way, he got a rude surprise when he came to know that he would still have to pay child support for both of them. Honestly, I could manage just fine without him, but I would be a fool to say no to extra money. The divorce was finalized, and we began living separately. In other news, Glenda had no idea her condition was getting worse, despite all the precautions we took, and she had just recently had an angioplasty and was recovering. Dylan and I decided to not tell her about the divorce until we were sure she could handle it. Away from Dylan, my life was much easier. I was able to get a babysitter for both kids, and after my maternity leave, I went straight to work to earn more cash. I began to realize that Dylan was just added weight that was just dragging me down. Without him, I was able to save not only my money but my mental sanity as well. My kids and I were thriving. Meanwhile, I heard that Dylan still didn't have a job, and was on the verge of breaking up with his girlfriend. He barely was able to keep up with the child support payments, but he wasn't my problem anymore. I somehow managed to convince Glenda that everything was fine because she still wasn't doing that good, and she bought it. A few months later, I got a call from the bank saying that there had been an increase in the frequency of withdrawals from Glenda's account. I usually added a certain amount of money to her account every month, and she barely made any withdrawals, let alone multiple times a week for months. She had her entire life savings in there, and I knew that she would have told me if there was an unexpected expense. I visited the bank, and they told me that the money had been withdrawn and deposited to none other than Dylan's account. I was furious. This pathetic man was stealing from his own mother. Glenda had no idea that her money was being debited. I requested the bank to block Glenda's account and prevent any more withdrawals unless she herself did it, and stormed straight to his house. When I confronted him, he said that I should mind my own business because it was his mother's money and he could do whatever he wanted with it. I told him that I was the one who was depositing money into her account, and he had no right to use her money, especially without her knowledge. He began getting aggressive and calling me all sorts of names. I told him that I blocked the account and there was no way he would be able to access it anymore. I told him to get a job and spend his own money on his GF instead of mooching off his sick mother. Barely a week later, I got the worst phone call of my life. It was from Glenda. I had never heard her sound so sad before. Let me sum it up quickly. Dylan was furious at me for blocking him from his Glenda's account. He went against his promise of not involving her in our matters and played the victim card. He met Glenda and filled her head with all sorts of lies. He told her that I forced him to have kids and used up all his savings. He also said that I was the one who constantly cheated on him and abused him. When he couldn't take it anymore and suggested separating, I threatened him by saying that I would give Glenda a heart attack by making up all sorts of lies about him and finishing her off once and for all. Out of fear for his mother's life, Dylan decided to continue staying in this loveless marriage. I couldn't believe that he had stooped to this level. He reversed the cards and victimized himself. On top of that, he told Glenda that I was the one who had been stealing out of her account every month and even called the bank to confirm the withdrawals. Oh, also, I had stolen away his kids even after he begged me to share custody with him. Yeah, he is the ultimate scumbag. He went and told Glenda all these lies, and she believed him. She called me up to say that she had no idea that I was such a vile human, and that she was ashamed that she ever thought of me as a daughter. What hurt the most was when she said that my mother would have been so disappointed in me if she were alive. She also said that I was such a pathetic wife. There was no wonder why Dylan decided to have an affair and leave me. She said that she supported it and I deserved it. Lastly, she said that she didn't want to see my face ever again and hung up. I wanted to tell Glenda the truth so badly, but I knew that she wouldn't be able to take it. This whole mess was already a huge shock to her, and she was very weak. I knew if she got any more stress, she literally could die. I kept quiet. I didn't say a word. It didn't matter if she thought I was a villain. If me being a bad person kept her alive, then so be it. I loved Glenda too much to have her death on my hands, so I shut my mouth and accepted everything she said. I would protect her no matter what. Dylan and I had a massive argument regarding this, and ultimately I chose my peace. I figured that there was no point arguing with an idiot like him because it just led to more problems. Although it hurt to not speak to Glenda anymore, I began to move on with my life and focus on my work and kids. Around 9 months passed, and I had no contact with Glenda until last week. I got a call from the hospital saying that Glenda had suffered a stroke and wanted to speak with me urgently. I rushed to the hospital. Glenda looked very weak. The doctor said that this stroke could have been fatal, but luckily her caretaker brought her in early. Glenda looked at me with tears in her eyes, and at that moment I knew that she knew the truth. She apologized to me, and it was difficult for her to even talk with all the tubes. She said that she was sorry for ever trusting Dylan over me. Apparently, in these past few months, Dylan had taken and used up all of Glenda's savings. She didn't even have enough money to pay for her hospital stay. When she found out that her money was being withdrawn, she cornered Dylan and demanded an explanation. He denied all the claims and blamed me, but she didn't believe him. Finally, he admitted to everything. He told her that he had lied about me and had used up all her money. Glenda said that after hearing everything she felt extremely uneasy and wanted to rush to meet me, but she fainted and was brought to the hospital. The minute she regained consciousness, she called me to apologize. I couldn't believe what a loser Dylan was. I told Glenda that she didn't need to apologize. The only reason I hid the truth from her was so that I could protect her. She said she wasn't worthy of my kindness and that she should have realized that Dylan was the problem in our marriage all along. I promised her that she didn't need to worry about anything and that I'd stick by her no matter what. She is currently still in the ICU. She is doing better, but we don't know what the future holds. Dylan is too ashamed to even show his face. I visit her every day, and I'm barely able to pay the bills. Am I being stupid by doing this? Should I just take her home and let her spend her last days in peace? Also, how do I tackle Dylan? I am so stressed and just need a break. Date 1. Hi, wow. So many of you are calling me all sorts of names on here. Yes, I was stupid for not leaving Dylan earlier. Don't you think I know that? Y'all are being so unnecessarily rude over the wrong things. Dylan literally caused his mother to have a stroke, and y'all are just brushing over that and blaming me for random things. Please stop. I have way too much on my plate already. I also got a bunch of supportive comments. Thank you so much. You have no idea what it means to me. Moving on to the update, it's been almost a month since my last post. Glenda is still hanging on, but it looks like her heart is about to give out. Her blood pressure is still high, and she is being constantly monitored. Dylan finally came to his senses and apologized for everything. Not that it would make much of a difference. He's already ruined all our lives. I can't bear to even look at him. I made it very clear to him that if he didn't give back all the money that he had taken from Glenda's account, I would contact the police, and then he would be in even more trouble. Dylan already has a bunch of felonies, so I know that the last thing he wants is having the police involved. He promised to help pay the medical bills and so far has been contributing to everything, which is the least he can do. Glenda refuses to see him. She says that even the thought of him gives her hypertension. Glenda is going through so much, but I'm still putting on a brave front. I was able to bring the kids to see her yesterday, and even though it was for a little while, she completely brightened up. The doctors are trying their best, but it doesn't loom promising. We're still hoping and praying, and I would appreciate it if you could too. Update 2. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for all your well wishes and prayers. Glenda is improving quite a bit and is finally out of the ICU, which is great for all of us. The doctors say that she is stable enough to leave the hospital. All our prayers have worked. She is getting discharged next week. She is still very high risk and doesn't have much time, but she is getting stronger and wants to leave the hospital more than ever. She says that when her time comes, she wants to be at home with her grandkids and not connected to tubes and machines. Surprisingly, Dylan has managed to give back all the money that he had taken. I don't know how long this act is going to last this time because the same thing happened to him last time as well, and we all know how that turned out. Anyway, Glenda and him are still not on speaking terms. I don't think she is ever going to forgive him. I finally feel like Dylan feels guilty for what he has done. But honestly, I am done giving him the benefit of the doubt. He is just facing the consequences of his own actions. Anyway, I'll keep you all updated. Update 3. Hey guys. Sorry it's been ages since my last update. I've been seeing so many comments asking how Glenda is doing and wondering if everything is okay since I haven't been active on here. Glenda is fine. No, she isn't dead. I saw so many comments saying that she passed away. But no, she is still very much alive. I have also seen many comments asking me to start a GoFundMe for donations for her treatment. While I do support the sentiment, I will not be taking any donations for Glenda. Thankfully, I have enough to manage all her bills. Either way, thank you for being so kind and supportive. Like I said, Glenda is doing fine. She got discharged a couple of months ago and is now living with me and the kids at our apartment. I have hired a full-time nurse to monitor her when I'm not home. The nurse also helps out with the kids, which is fantastic. Glenda has been improving day by day. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the fact that she is with her grandkids. Whatever it is, I am so happy that she's okay. She is even walking around and playing with the girls. It brings tears to my eyes whenever I see them together, and I just want to freeze the moment forever. Honestly, it's a miracle that we even have her right now. The doctors told us that there was a slim chance that she was even going to be discharged. But here she is, still thriving. We have been inseparable since her discharge, and it's as if she's making up for lost time. I'm so happy to have her. Last week she told me that she should have known that I was protecting her this whole time because that would have been exactly what my mom would have done too. I nearly bawled. As for Dylan, he visits occasionally, but none of us care. He is trying to get to know the girls, but the minute he starts acting funky, he is not going to be in touch with them again. I can't let them go through the trauma that I've been through. Dylan and I are not on good terms, but if he's planning on stepping up to be a good dad, I am no one to stop him. As of now, everything seems to be fine, and we're taking each day in stride. I would appreciate it if you continue to keep Glenda in your prayers. Now on to the next story. Story 6. Ex-husband, who left me for another woman, now says I'm the love of his life. I rejected him and got a restraining order, and now his family blames me for his breakdown. I read it. I'm in a really tough situation and could use some advice. Sorry in advance for the long post, but there's a lot to unpack here. I met my husband, Mark, 5 years ago through mutual friends at a local art gallery opening. We were both there to support our friend Lisa, who was showcasing her paintings. I remember being struck by Mark's enthusiasm for the artwork. He had this infectious energy and a way of describing the pieces that made them come alive. We ended up talking for hours that night, long after most of the other guests had left. Mark and I hit it off right away. He was charming, funny, and we seemed to have a lot in common. We both loved hiking and spending time outdoors. We shared a passion for trying new restaurants and experimenting with cooking at home, and we could talk for hours about books, movies, and our dreams for the future. Our relationship progressed quickly after that first meeting. We started dating, and it felt like we were always on the same wavelength. Mark was attentive and romantic, always planning thoughtful dates or surprising me with little gifts. I felt like I had finally found my person. After dating for about a year, we got married in a small, intimate ceremony in my parents' backyard. It was a perfect day. The weather was beautiful. We were surrounded by our closest family and friends, and I felt so full of hope for our future together. I thought I had found my soulmate and was so excited to start our life as a married couple. The first couple of years of marriage were great. We bought a cute little fixer-upper house and spent weekends painting and renovating together. We adopted a rescue dog named Buddy, who quickly became the center of our world. Mark and I talked about starting a family soon and would stay up late imagining what our kids might be like. Mark was always very affectionate and attentive during this time. He would leave sweet notes in my lunch bag or surprise me with flowers just because. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found such a loving partner. We had our disagreements, of course, but we always managed to work through them as a team. Things started to change about 2 years ago. Mark got a big promotion at work that came with a lot more responsibility. He started working later hours and seemed stressed all the time. When he was home, he was often distracted and short-tempered. I tried to be understanding, knowing how much pressure he was under at work. I would make his favorite meals or suggest relaxing activities to help him unwind, but it felt like there was a growing distance between us. I started to notice other changes, too. Mark became very protective of his phone, always keeping it face down or taking calls in another room. He was less affectionate and our sex life dwindled. When I asked if everything was okay, he would brush it off and say work was just busy. I wanted to believe him, but I had a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Then one day, I came home early from work with a migraine. As I walked into our bedroom to lie down, I found Mark hastily shoving clothes into a suitcase. My heart dropped as I asked what was going on. Mark looked like a deer caught in headlights. He sat down heavily on the bed and broke down, confessing that he had reconnected with his ex-girlfriend, Sarah. Apparently, they had run into each other at a coffee shop a few months prior. They started talking and realized they still had a strong connection. Mark said he had been confused about his feelings and didn't know how to tell me. He claimed he never meant for things to go this far, but he had realized he still had deep feelings for Sarah and wanted to give their relationship another shot. I was completely blindsided and devastated. Through my tears, I asked how he could do this to me, to us. We had built a life together. We had plans and dreams. How could he throw it all away? Mark just kept saying he was sorry, but that Sarah was the one that got away, and he needed to see if things could work with her. He said he had always wondered, what if, and couldn't pass up this chance to find out. Before I could even process what was happening, Mark grabbed his suitcase and left. Just like that, my world imploded. I collapsed on our bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Buddy came and curled up next to me, sensing my distress. I don't know how long I laid there, feeling like I couldn't breathe. The next few weeks were a blur of grief and confusion. Mark moved in with Sarah right away. He texted me a few times to say he was sorry for hurting me, but that he felt this was the right decision. I was heartbroken and angry. How could he throw away our marriage so easily? How long had he been lying to me, pretending everything was fine while he was secretly seeing Sarah? I leaned heavily on my friends and family during this time. My best friend, Emma, practically moved in with me for a couple of weeks to make sure I was eating and taking care of myself. She would drag me out of bed, force me to shower, and try to distract me with movies or walks with Buddy. My parents were furious at Mark but so supportive of me. They helped me sort out practical matters like separating our finances and figuring out what to do with the house. Slowly, I started to put the pieces of my life back together. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied. I picked up some new hobbies, like pottery and yoga, to fill my evenings. I started seeing a therapist to work through my feelings of betrayal and abandonment. It was a long, painful process, but gradually I began to heal and rediscover who I was as an individual. About 6 months after Mark left, I ran into his brother at the grocery store. It was awkward. We had been close when Mark and I were together, but I hadn't heard from any of his family since he left. His brother hesitantly told me that things hadn't worked out between Mark and Sarah. Apparently, the spark fizzled pretty quickly once the excitement of their reunion wore off. They had been arguing constantly, and Mark had moved out. I thanked him for letting me know, but that I had moved on and didn't want any more information about Mark's life. It was strange. Part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction knowing their relationship hadn't worked out, but mostly I just felt sad for all the pain and upheaval we had gone through. Fast forward to now, nearly 2 years since Mark left. I've rebuilt my life, and I'm in a much better place emotionally. I sold our house and bought a small condo that feels like my own space. I've made new friends through my hobby groups and feel confident in who I am as a single woman. I'm dating casually but taking things slow, still working on fully trusting again. Yesterday, out of the blue, I got a text from Mark asking if we could meet up to talk. He said he made a huge mistake leaving me and wants to try to work things out. He claims he's realized I'm the love of his life, and he'll do anything to win me back. He mentioned that seeing me recently, which I wasn't aware of, made him realize how much he missed me and our life together. Part of me wants to hear him out. Despite everything, I did love him deeply, and a small part of me still cares for him. We shared so many good memories, and at one point I thought we'd grow old together. But a bigger part is angry that he thinks he can just waltz back into my life after what he did. I've worked so hard to move on and heal. The thought of opening myself up to that pain again is terrifying. I haven't responded to his text yet. I'm not sure what to do. Should I agree to meet with him? Ignore him completely? Tell him in no uncertain terms that we're done for good? I worry that if I see him in person, all those old feelings will come rushing back. But I also wonder if I'll always have a what if in the back of my mind if I don't at least hear what he has to say. I could really use some outside perspectives on this. Has anyone been in a similar situation? How did you handle it? I feel so conflicted and don't want to make a decision I'll regret. Thanks for reading this far. Any advice would be appreciated. Date 1. Thank you all so much for your comments and support on my original post. I really appreciate the thoughtful advice and perspectives. I wanted to give an update on what's happened since then. After a lot of consideration, I decided to meet with Mark. I know many of you advised against it, but I felt I needed closure to fully move on. We agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop, somewhere public where I felt safe. I made sure to tell Emma where I was going and asked her to check in on me afterward. The days leading up to the meeting were nerve-wracking. I found myself oscillating between anger, anxiety, and a tiny flicker of hope that I tried hard to squash. The morning of, I spent way too long agonizing over what to wear. I wanted to look good, but not like I was trying too hard. In the end, I settled on a casual outfit that made me feel confident. Seeing Mark again after all this time was strange. He looked older, more worn down than I remembered. There were new lines around his eyes and a weariness to his posture. As soon as I sat down, he launched into an emotional speech about how sorry he was and how much he regretted leaving me. Mark said that his time with Sarah had been a disaster from the start. The fantasy of rekindling their old relationship quickly gave way to the reality of why they had broken up in the first place. They fought constantly and realized they wanted different things in life. He claimed that he thought about me every day and missed the life we had built together. I mostly sat and listened, my emotions swirling. Part of me felt vindicated hearing that things hadn't worked out with Sarah. Another part ached seeing Mark so upset. But mostly, I felt a sense of detachment, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. When he finished, I calmly told him that while I appreciated his apology, I wasn't interested in reconciling. I explained how deeply he had hurt me and that I'd worked hard to move on with my life. His actions had consequences, and he couldn't just undo them because he was having regrets now. I told Mark about the life I had built for myself. My new condo, my promotion at work, the friends I had made. I even mentioned that I had started dating again. It felt important to show him that I was doing well without him. Mark got upset at this point. He started pleading, saying he'd do anything to win me back. He even pulled out a ring and tried to propose right there in the coffee shop. I was mortified and angry that he would try such a grand gesture without any regard for my feelings or the fact that we were in public. I stood up and told him firmly that it was over between us for good. As I was leaving, he grabbed my arm and begged me not to go. I yanked my arm away and loudly told him not to touch me. The whole cafe was staring at this point. I left quickly, shaken by the encounter. Over the next few days, Mark bombarded me with calls, texts, and emails. He left long voicemails, alternating between apologies and declarations of love. He sent flowers to my work with cards promising to make things right. He even contacted my parents, trying to get them to convince me to take him back. I blocked his number and told my workplace not to accept any more deliveries from him. I thought that would be the end of it, but Mark's behavior only escalated. He started showing up at places he knew I frequented. My favorite coffee shop, the park where I walk buddy, even outside my yoga studio. Each time I saw him, my anxiety spiked. I started changing my routines, always looking over my shoulder. It felt like I couldn't relax anywhere. My friends noticed how jumpy I had become and urged me to take legal action. The final straw came when I arrived home one evening to find Mark sitting on my front steps. He had been waiting there for hours, hoping to catch me. Seeing him at my home, my safe space, filled me with fear and anger. I immediately called the police. When they arrived, they gave Mark a stern warning about trespassing and harassment. After that incident, I went to the courthouse and filed for a restraining order. I felt guilty taking such a drastic step, but I knew I needed to protect myself. The judge granted a temporary order right away, given Mark's escalating behavior. I have a hearing scheduled next month to make it permanent. This whole experience has been emotionally draining. It's brought up a lot of the pain and trauma from when Mark first left, but it's also reinforced that I made the right decision in moving on from him. His actions have shown me that he still doesn't respect my boundaries or wishes. I'm grateful for my support system that has helped me stay strong through all of this. Emma has been checking in on me daily and even offered to let me stay with her if I don't feel safe at home. My parents have been a constant source of support, reminding me that I deserve better than how Mark is treating me. I'm focusing now on healing from this renewed trauma and protecting my peace. I've started seeing my therapist again to process everything. We're working on strategies to help me feel safe and regain my sense of independence. I'm also looking into moving to a new place where Mark doesn't know the address. It breaks my heart to think about leaving my condo that I've made my own, but I need to prioritize my safety and peace of mind. Buddy and I have started looking at apartments in a different part of town. Thank you again to everyone who offered advice and support. It really helped give me the strength to stand firm in my decision. I'll post another update after the restraining order hearing if there are any significant developments. Update 2. Hello everyone. I wanted to provide one last update on my situation with Mark. A lot has happened since my last post, and I'm still processing it all. The hearing for the permanent restraining order was last week. I was incredibly nervous about seeing Mark in court. The days leading up to the hearing were filled with anxiety. I had trouble sleeping and couldn't focus at work. My lawyer reassured me that I wouldn't have to interact with Mark directly, but the thought of being in the same room as him made my stomach turn. When we arrived at the courthouse, I was surprised to see that Mark didn't show up. My lawyer said this sometimes happens. The person realizes they don't have a case and decides not to contest the order. The judge reviewed the evidence of Mark's harassment, including the police report from when he was at my house, and granted the permanent order without hesitation. I felt an immense sense of relief walking out of the courthouse. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe easier. I treated myself to lunch at my favorite cafe to celebrate, something I hadn't felt comfortable doing lately for fear of running into Mark. However, that relief was short-lived. The very next day, I received a call from Mark's sister, Jenny. She and I had been close when Mark and I were married. We used to have weekly sister nights where we'd drink wine and watch terrible reality TV shows together. I hadn't heard from her since Mark left me, so seeing her name pop up on my phone was a shock. Jenny was hysterical on the phone, saying Mark had been in a car accident and was in the hospital. Apparently, he had been driving erratically and crashed into a tree. Jenny said he had a concussion and some broken ribs but was stable. Then she dropped a bombshell. Mark had been drinking heavily, and they found a suicide note in the car. Jenny begged me to come to the hospital, saying Mark was asking for me. She said he was distraught about the restraining order and kept saying he had nothing left to live for. I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Concern for Mark's well-being, anger that he would put his family through this, guilt wondering if I had pushed him to this point by getting the restraining order. I told Jenny I needed some time to think and would call her back. I immediately called my therapist, and we had an emergency session. She helped me work through my feelings and reminded me that I wasn't responsible for Mark's actions. She advised against going to the hospital, saying it could undo all the progress I've made in setting boundaries. After a lot of soul-searching, I decided not to go to the hospital. I called Jenny back and told her I was sorry to hear about the accident, but that it wasn't appropriate for me to be involved. I suggested she look into getting Mark some professional help once he was released from the hospital. A few days later, Jenny called again. She told me Mark had been released from the hospital but was in bad shape mentally. He was talking about hurting himself and blaming me for ruining his life by getting the restraining order. Jenny asked if I would consider dropping it so Mark could contact me again. She said she was afraid of what he might do if he couldn't reach out to me. I felt terrible, but I firmly told Jenny that I would not be dropping the order under any circumstances. I explained that Mark's mental health was not my responsibility and that he needed professional help that I couldn't provide. I suggested she look into having him involuntarily committed if she truly feared for his safety. Jenny got angry at this point, saying I was being selfish and that if anything happened to Mark, it would be my fault. I stood my ground, but the conversation left me shaken. I spent the rest of the day second-guessing my decision and wondering if I was doing the right thing. I reached out to my parents and Emma for support. They reassured me that I was making the right choice in maintaining my boundaries. Emma reminded me of all the progress I've made and how much healthier and happier I've been since setting firm limits with Mark. My dad even offered to call Jenny himself to tell her to stop pressuring me, but I declined. Since then, I haven't heard anything more from Mark or his family. I'm trying to move forward with my life and not let this situation consume me. It's been challenging. I still have moments of doubt and guilt, but I'm working hard in therapy to process these feelings and remind myself that I'm not responsible for Mark's choices. I've thrown myself into a home renovation project as a positive distraction. I decided to stay in my condo after all, and I'm focusing on making it feel even more like my own space. I've repainted the living room, bought some new furniture, and I'm learning how to do basic repairs myself. It feels empowering to take control of my environment like this. My friends have been amazing through all of this. Emma and I have a standing weekly dinner date where we cook together and catch up. It's become a highlight of my week and helps me feel less alone. My other friends have been checking in regularly and helping me stay busy with group outings and activities. I've also started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Spending time with the dogs there reminds me of the early days with Buddy and brings me a lot of joy. It feels good to be making a difference in these animals' lives, and it's helping me focus on something positive. Work has been a bit of a struggle. My concentration isn't great, and I've had to take more sick days than usual to deal with the stress of everything. I finally opened up to my boss about what's been going on. She was incredibly understanding and has worked with me to adjust some of my deadlines and responsibilities while I get back on my feet. As for my love life, I'm still taking things very slow. I've been on a few casual dates, but I'm not ready for anything serious yet. I'm focusing on rebuilding my trust in myself and my own judgment before I try to trust someone else in a relationship again. Buddy has been my constant companion through all of this. His unconditional love and goofy antics never failed to bring a smile to my face, even on my toughest days. We've been going on lots of long walks and hikes, which help clear my head and remind me of the simple joys in life. I know this isn't the happiest ending, but I'm proud of myself for maintaining my boundaries and prioritizing my own well-being. This experience has shown me how strong I can be, even in the face of intense pressure and guilt. I'm hopeful that with time, the anxiety and stress from this situation will fade, and I'll be able to fully move on with my life. Thank you all again for your support throughout this journey. Your advice and encouragement have meant more than you know. I truly appreciate this community and the strength it's given me to stand firm in my decisions. While I don't plan on posting any more updates, please know that your kindness has made a real difference in my life. Now on to the next story. Story 7. My dog has been acting different, and I found out our teenage son sodomized it. Okay, for obvious reasons, this is a throwaway account, so I'm not even sure how to start here. The last couple of weeks, my dog, a 7-year-old lab, has been acting noticeably different. I guess I could describe it as distant and even depressed. He is normally an extremely outgoing and happy dog, very playful and energetic, etc. But starting about 2 weeks ago, he started acting very withdrawn and nervous around people, even his own family. At first, I kind of brushed it off as feeling under the weather, but after about a week and a half, I decided maybe he needed to see a vet. I got him in yesterday, and after an examination, the vet told me that he believes the dog has been sodomized. His anus had slight damage in a way that was consistent with that sort of thing. He said he can't really imagine that his injuries could have come about any other way. So, already now, I'm pretty upset and sort of freaking out. Who would do this sort of thing to a dog? I thought about all the people that had access to the dog. Gardeners in my backyard, my neighbors, etc. The only people that live in the house are my wife, myself, and our teenage son. I came home and thought about it for a while. I had this really ugly sinking feeling in my stomach about the possibility that it could have been my son. I decided to look around his room. I didn't really know what I was expecting to find, and I didn't really find anything in there that screamed guilty until I decided to check his browser history. I found he had been on a bestiality forum recently, on a site with pictures of that sort of thing. I felt like I was going to throw up. Now I know that this isn't definitive proof of anything, but it sure doesn't look good. The more I think about it, the more I am convinced my son has been sodomizing our dog. I haven't told my wife yet or done anything about it. I have not left him alone with the dog since. I am totally confused and upset and don't really know how to proceed with this. Reddit, please help. Edit. Thank you for all your advice. To those of you who are serious, I understand this seems like a joke to some of you, but it's not to me. So, for those of you that gave real advice, thank you. I think I'm going to take your advice and confront him about it privately, without involving my wife. It is not going to be an easy conversation, but it has to happen. My only worry is the possibility that he isn't guilty of this and somebody else did it. I guess then we still need to talk about what I found on his computer anyways. UFML. Thank you for being there for me. Reddit. Edit 2. Okay. My son just got home. I'm going to have the conversation with him when I can get a moment alone, and I will come back and let you guys know what happened. Edit 3. Okay, just spoke to my son. Before I get into our talk, let me quickly say thank you all again for your incredible advice and support. There were a lot of really helpful suggestions in here, and I took some of your advice. Anyways, our family had dinner and did our usual nighttime stuff. My wife and I watched TV. Son was in his room after dinner, like all teenagers are, and the dog obviously was with me. I waited for my wife to go to bed, which felt like forever because I was so nervous, but she finally did about an hour ago, and I went into my son's room to have the talk. I basically said, listen, I noticed the dog has been acting weird. I took him to the vet. I found out someone has sodomized him. Any ideas what might have happened? I looked at my son, and he seemed ever so slightly nervous but pretended to know nothing about it. I expected this, so I brought up the sites I found on his computer. Naturally, this made him pretty upset, and he got really indignant at the thought that I snooped around on his computer. Fair enough, I get it, but I got him back to the point and tried to be as understanding and fatherly as I could and just told him that whatever happened, I am not going to judge him and he's not going to be punished. I just need to know the truth. After about 10 to 15 minutes of this, he finally breaks down and admits that he put the handle of a hairbrush, as well as fingers, into the dog a few times during a day last week. He said he wasn't trying to hurt him, and he stopped when the dog, at one point, freaked out. He said he didn't think he hurt it that bad, and he was too embarrassed to tell us or do anything about it. I believed him in this, but he also didn't give a very satisfactory answer as to why exactly he would do this in the first place. I have to admit, either way, I was glad on some level to hear that he wasn't actually having sex with the dog. So basically, we agreed that I wouldn't tell his mom, but that we would find a reason to tell her that he needs to see a therapist for a bit. I know I told him I wouldn't tell his mother, but the more I think about all of this, the more I think I may eventually have to go back on that promise. As for now, the dog is staying with the family, and obviously I made him swear up and down that he will not touch the dog like that again, under threat of severe consequences. It's too early to tell if he feels remorse or is just humiliated. It's hard to say. It was very uncomfortable for both of us, but especially my son. I'm sure we can all imagine. Thank you all again so incredibly much for your support, advice, understanding, and love for both the dog and my son. I have to admit, some of you even made me laugh at a few things. I didn't want to. Thanks again, Reddit. Edit 4. Due to the outpouring of concern and help from you guys, I will update in a week or so and let you know what's happened today. Today, I located a therapist that specializes in teenagers. I made a preliminary appointment for my son to go in and talk to her. I disclosed to her some of the issues without getting into too much detail for now. My son does not know this, but it will be helpful for her to have some idea of what we're dealing with. My dog is still not in the best of spirits but seems to be making progress. I went for a walk with him today, and he was more playful than he has been the past week. I've been trying to be extra good to him as well, and the love seems to be helping slowly bring the happiness back into his eyes. Can't say I'm still not a little peeved about what happened, but I feel like to show my son that I am too upset might be damaging right now. I think we just need to find out why he thought this was okay. As for the brush handle, some of you bring up a good point. I should ask him to throw whichever brush that is away. For some reason, that didn't even cross my mind. Yikes. Anyways, I'll give you all an update on the situation in a week. Thanks again. Update 1. Long story short, 2 months ago I took my dog, Colby, to the vet after he was acting weird. The vet determined the dog may have been sodomized. After a lot of thought, I checked the browser history on my son's computer and found he had been viewing pictures of bestiality and seemed to be active in a forum about it. I confronted him, and he admitted to sodomizing our dog with a handle of a hairbrush and his fingers. After asking Reddit for help, I decided to put him in therapy and not let my wife know about the issue and tell her he just wanted to talk to somebody professionally. Well, this morning I caught my son in the backyard holding onto Colby's genitals while playing tug-of-war with him. Granted, this isn't sodomization, and the dog seemed to be okay, but my son was basically grabbing and massaging the dog's privates as he held him in place under the guise of a tug-of-war game. Obviously, I stormed outside and grabbed him in anger, and we had a very serious and angry talk. He had promised me to never treat the dog in any remotely inappropriate way after our last incident. I put him in his room for the rest of the day. My wife is still at work, and I do not know what to do. I am at my wit's end. Apparently, therapy has not been working. Reddit, how do I deal with this? I think I have to tell my wife now, which is not exciting since she has been in the dark about the sodomizing incident for 2 months. I am not sure how to deal with all of this. You guys really helped me last time. Any advice is appreciated. Thank you. Update 2. Okay, well, that didn't go so well. My wife got home not too long after I put this up. I told her pretty much right off the bat that I messed up pretty bad and that I found out 2 months ago that our son had admitted to me he sodomized the dog with a hairbrush handle and his fingers. I told her that this was why I had wanted him in therapy and that he wasn't comfortable with her knowing, and I made him a fatherly promise under the condition he never do anything like that again. Needless to say, she was pretty shocked and upset. Then I told her what I saw today, and she got even more upset. It went from a few minutes of anger to tears. She is pretty pissed off at me and pretty upset about our son and Colby. Obviously, I feel like shit at this point for having kept her in the dark. She told me she felt very, very betrayed, and after calling me some choice names and saying she was confused, she grabbed her purse and just left the house. I have no idea where she went, but I didn't try to stop her. She was very, very upset. I feel like the worst husband/father in the world right now. I went in to speak to my son, and he was pretty unhappy too, since he could hear everything. Obviously, he was in no hurry to come out of his room for that. He isn't very happy that I told his mom about today and the incident before, but after speaking with him briefly, I think he understands that it was necessary. So basically, my family was torn apart today over a dog. I need a beer or something. As for rehousing the dog, I suspect we'll probably have to do that, but there's a lot we need to sort through first. I'm sure there is an uncomfortable family meeting in our future. Thanks for the advice and for being there. Reddit. Update 3. Wow, front page. Thanks for the outpouring of support. I hope nobody I know is a Redditor. Didn't quite expect this to get so big. Haha. Well, anyways, my wife is still gone. I tried to call her on her cell just one time, and she didn't pick up, so I got the message. I've just been in the yard with Colby, on the computer having a beer. This is crazy. I wish fatherhood/marriage came with a guidebook. I guess Reddit is kind of close, right? Well, except for the odd people saying, remove the son and all those super helpful suggestions. I'll keep you updated as the night goes on. Hopefully, my wife actually does return at some point. As for my son, all he's done is make a hot pocket and go back to his room. Basically just being a teenager in trouble. Edit. Since a lot of you are curious, my son is 15 years old. I posted this in a comment in the original thread. I thought I had included it in the main post, but I realized I did not. Hope that helps. Update 4. Okay. Well, my wife called me to say she is staying at her sister's house tonight to clear her head. She has calmed down a bit, but said she doesn't think she can handle all of this tonight. I said I understood and apologized again profusely for not telling her sooner. I tried to explain what another Redditor mentioned about how the first incident was a weird male adolescent sexual thing and he was embarrassed and thought he could confide in me and trust me. She was pretty unmoved by that argument and thinks I should have told her. I guess I was wrong. When we got off the phone, I said, "I love you," and she just hung up. This is probably up there as my worst day in recent memory, at least since the day I found out my son sodomized my dog the first time. As for my son, I have seen no sign of him since he made his hot pocket. However, for about 40 minutes now, I've been hearing what I'm guessing is dubstep coming from his room. I don't know. I'm too old to even want to know. Colby will sleep in my room tonight, and tomorrow hopefully the wife will be calm enough to discuss what to do with him. She loves that dog a lot. I am not sure how she is going to want to move forward with all of this. For my part, I can already think of 2 families we know that would probably be happy to take the cobster. Jesus, what a day. Thanks. Reddit. Update 5. A lot of Redditors were very supportive and helpful with this delicate situation, and I received many letters offering to take in our dog, Colby, after the second incident. It was really touching to have so many people reach out. I've also gotten a lot of messages asking for an update on what has happened since the last post. Well, a hell of a lot has happened to my family since then, and none of it has been very good. Basically, after hiding the first incident from my wife, I felt obligated to tell her about it when I caught my son sexually abusing Colby again. Turns out, not telling her the first time around was probably the worst decision I have ever made. My wife did not take the news well at all, as I mentioned in my last post. She left the house to stay with her sister for a few days and wouldn't pick up my calls. The breach of trust and the fact that I hid something so serious from her really pissed her off. To be honest, our marriage has already been pretty rocky the last year or two, for reasons I'd prefer not to get into, so this was just one more bump in the road that our relationship really didn't need. To be fair, I was only trying to be a good father to my son, and I thought I could keep the initial incident between him and I to protect him from further humiliation. It would have been okay if he had kept his word that he would not abuse the dog ever again. Unfortunately, he did not, and I had to involve his mom. Admittedly, I should have just done that from the beginning. So, after staying at her sister's house for a few days, my wife came home, and we got into several arguments over the next week or so about our son and what to do about this, and of course, there was plenty of me being painted as the bad guy for not including her on a major parenting issue. I decided to take Reddit's advice that we should start looking for a new home for Colby since he obviously wasn't going to be safe with us anymore. My wife did not like this idea, and after several more arguments, I come to find out that she suspects our son never even abused the dog to begin with. She tells me that she has spoken to our son about it, and he denied ever doing anything. So basically, I had my son denying he ever sodomized the dog, and my wife now pissed off because she is hearing 2 conflicting stories from us. She even brought up, in the heat of our argument, that she thinks I sodomized the dog, which, as you can imagine, made me absolutely furious. So, to make a long story short, we did not resolve anything and have only become more embittered with each other. This, along with a few other marital issues, finally led to my wife asking for a trial separation about 3 weeks ago. My son has decided to live with her, and so I have moved out to a friend's house temporarily while I try to figure out what we are going to do next. I know you guys are probably going to be pissed about this, but Colby is still living with my wife and son. I tried to take him with me, but this only led to more friction and infuriating jabs from my wife. Why, so you can sodomize him again and blame it on your son, you sicky F, etc., etc. This whole thing has just become a complete nightmare. I have tried to confront my son about denying what he did to his mom, and he won't even talk to me and has just started taking the stance that I'm crazy. I guess he thought he saw a way out of all of this and decided to just throw his dad under the bus. That is probably the most hurtful part of this entire ordeal, to be honest. I'm used to having my wife be a complete a-hole to me at this point, but the betrayal by my son, who I was only trying to help, is like a knife in my heart. That being said, I have to remind myself he is just a kid in an awkward situation and try not to hold it against him. After all, if my wife and I wind up with a divorce down the road, he is going to be the only thing I love, so I am trying not to do irreparable damage to our relationship. I feel like I've done enough damage to this family, and all of this over a goddamn Labrador. I wish I could say my priority at this time was still on Colby's safety, but I would be lying. My relationship with my family is in tatters, and I don't know what to do to fix it. Obviously, I would still like to see Colby rehomed as well, but I feel like I need to focus on fixing my relationship with my wife and son so my life can go back to normal. So, Reddit, I know this is kind of a unique situation, but I'm sure there's got to be some of you out there who have had something similar happen to you. Any advice for a dad who is losing control? Update 6. To put a long story short, I discovered my teenage son had sexually abused our family dog, Colby, with a hairbrush and his fingers a few months ago. After I confronted him about it, he confessed and promised never to do it again, and in return I agreed to keep it between him and I and not tell his mom. A while later, I discovered my son reneged on his promise to me and had abused the dog again. This time, I felt I had to bring my wife into the matter, and when I told her, it all blew up in my face. She couldn't believe her son would do that sort of thing, and she eventually got it into her head somehow that it must have been me that abused the dog. A short while after telling her about these incidents, we separated, and she wound up with the dog and my son, who, when confronted, went back and denied that he had ever done anything to the dog, despite admitting to me that he had, and me actually catching him in the act a different time. So, the last time I updated, I had been living at a friend's house while my wife, son, and Colby stayed at the family house. My wife was somehow convinced that I was the abuser of our dog and that I was blaming it on my son, which is maybe the most confusing and infuriating feeling I have ever had. I tried calling my son for several days and hoped that I could convince him to come clean and help get us on the road to fixing our family. He did not pick up, nor did he ever call me back. So, about 2 weeks ago, I decided to show up at the house when I knew they would all be there. I knocked on the door, and my wife would not answer it. I admit I kind of lost it and started shouting and pounding on it, and she eventually came outside where a yelling match ensued between her and I in the front yard. I finally left after she just put her hands over her ears and started yelling, dog shit," over and over again to try to humiliate me in front of the neighborhood. As I walked back to my car fuming, I looked back at the house and saw my son staring at me from the second-story window with a blank look on his face. I stared at him and shook my head in disappointment, but he didn't change his expression. I have to admit that really broke my heart and pissed me off. So, fast forward to just a couple of days ago. I am at work, nearing the end of my day, when suddenly my phone rings, and it's my wife. I pick it up, and she's sobbing and obviously very upset. She tells me that Colby has bitten my son, and he has gone to the hospital to get stitches. She says Colby bit him in the lower abdomen 2 times. She doesn't know what to think. Obviously, I know exactly what happened. I could tell she finally knew I was right. Colby would never bite anyone unprovoked. He is an incredibly friendly dog and has no history of biting or being aggressive at all. When we got off the phone, I felt this rage building inside of me. I felt like it was finally time for this thing to end. Colby had stood up for himself against my son, who had betrayed both of us. I couldn't prove it, but I just know my son was abusing the dog again, and I felt responsible for having left him alone with Colby all of these times. It was like Colby finally lashed out in desperation after having nobody there to protect him. I felt sick to my stomach for having abandoned my dog with my kid, who obviously doesn't give a shit about me or any of us as long as he can keep getting away with what he's doing. I left work and went straight to the family home. This time, my wife answered the door and let me in. I went straight to my son's room where he was laying down watching TV. He looked at me in surprise, and I told him not to talk. I basically said, "I know what you did. You can deny it, and you can blame me all you want, but you and I both know what happened. I am taking the dog, and if I ever find out you go near an animal like this again, I will report you to the police." I don't care if you are my son. This is disgusting and unfair, and I raised you better. Obviously, I said more than that, but that was the gist of it. He was extremely uncomfortable. Then I went downstairs and out the back door to get the dog. I put a leash on Colby and walked him back through the house, and my wife stopped me and told me she was sorry. We talked for about 5 minutes and we both got a little weepy. She asked me to forgive her, which I told her I did. She then invited me to stay at the house, to which I said no. I'm not ready for that, and Colby deserved better. I had already let him down too many times. I left her crying in the house and put Colby in the car. We drove back to my friend's place where I am staying. I've since been looking for a small apartment with a short-term lease that accepts dogs, as I have decided that I am not going to move back in with my family, at least not in the immediate future. Colby is finally with me and is safe, and I need time to think about what our next move should be. I know that asking my friend to house me and now a dog is pushing the bounds of his good grace. So this is what has to happen. A lot of you have written to me asking for updates, and I apologize for not getting back to all of you. Mostly, I had no significant changes in the situation until all of this, but I thought you all deserved to know that the dog is safe. However, I still do not know what I'm going to do about my son and wife. Do you think I should report him? As the more I think about it, the more I am sure he will probably just do this again. Colby might be safe, but I am still, despite all he's done to me, worried about my son. He is a minor, so legally I am still responsible for him. What sort of thing does one do for somebody who does this? Final update. 3 years later, OP posted an Ask Me Anything, but it was taken down by the mods. However, he left this comment on another post in 2018. 6 years later after the first post, things are better. Colby sadly passed away about a year ago, but he was getting up there for a dog his size, and it was of natural causes. I'm not sure I want to talk much about my son, but I'll say he and I are much better than we were in 2012 when the incident took place. It's not something we talk about with one another. I hope and pray he no longer fantasizes or concerns himself with that type of behavior. If he does, I wouldn't know about it since he lives on his own now. As for my ex-wife, well, she wound up in therapy after losing her job. Honestly, we don't communicate much, but I do not hear good things about what she's up to now. There are rumors of drugs and certain favors, etc. I don't really want to get into it for my son's sake. As for me, I've been with a new woman for a few years now, and things are much better. She has a son as well, and we get along just fine. I have to say, life is funny. Who would have ever thought my son putting something in our dog's behind would lead us all down such strange paths? Sometimes I wonder what life would be like if I had never caught him doing it. But who knows? Life is crazy. Folks, love your dogs. We have reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.